Hey guys, welcome back to Boring History to Sleep. Tonight, we're diving into a story that's as mysterious as it is unsettling, the 1990 heist at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston. Picture this, a quiet, unassuming evening at a world-class museum filled with art, history, and untold treasures. It's not the scene of an action-packed thriller, but more like a slow, methodical unfolding. You may be wondering why this is boring history for sleep and not exciting history for staying awake. Well, let me assure you, the details of this heist will lull you into the dreamiest thoughts, especially with its peculiar, almost anticlimactic nature. So if you're hoping for a car chase, prepare for a very different kind of suspense. You probably won't survive this if you're looking for high-speed thrills, but if you're a fan of calm, cerebral storytelling that brings a chill, this one's for you. Before you settle in, take a quick second to hit that like button and subscribe, only if you really appreciate the content I share. And go ahead and post where you're tuning in from and what time it is in your neck of the woods. I'm curious where the world's winding down tonight. Alright, time to lower the lights, maybe a fan on for that quiet background hum, and together we'll settle into tonight's adventure. On the night of March 18, 1990, two men dressed as police officers walked into the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, located in Boston's Fenway neighborhood, and committed what remains one of the most infamous unsolved art heists in history. The thieves weren't just taking any ordinary trinkets, they were after masterpieces. As the museum guards were detained in the back office, the men proceeded to make off with 13 pieces of artwork, including works by Vermeer, Rembrandt, and Degas. The stolen art had an estimated value of over 500 million, though the final number fluctuates given the immeasurable value of these rare works of art. But what's fascinating, and certainly not what you'd expect, is the way this heist unfolded. There were no shots fired, no major struggle. In fact, the whole affair was eerily quiet. The thieves' calm, deliberate actions raised many eyebrows. They even took the time to cut the paintings from their frames, a strange choice that would add a further layer of mystery to their motives. It was almost as though the criminals had all the time in the world, yet they simply disappeared into thin air, leaving behind a void in one of the most carefully curated collections in the world. The theft remained unsolved for decades, sparking a web of theories, investigations, and wild guesses. Some wondered whether the thieves had some kind of inside knowledge, while others speculated about mob connections. No one really knew, and as the years passed, the case began to slip from the forefront of the public's mind. The museum, for its part, responded by offering an ever-growing reward for any information leading to the recovery of the stolen pieces. But despite these efforts, the paintings were never returned. Historians still argue whether the museum's security system was simply outdated or if the thieves were just that clever. What remains undeniable, however, is that the Gardner Museum heist, as it came to be known, captured the imagination of people all over the world. It wasn't just about the stolen art, it was about the way the heist was conducted, the chilling realization that such a grand theft could occur in broad daylight, and the almost dreamlike stillness with which it all unfolded. Isabella Stewart Gardner, the woman behind the museum that bears her name, was as eccentric and captivating as the collection she created. Born in 1840, she was a woman of many interests, but none so profound as her love of art. She had a deep appreciation for culture, and through her travels she cultivated a unique and sophisticated taste. By the time she was in her mid-30s, Gardner had already amassed a wealth of art, rare artifacts, and decorative pieces that she displayed in her home in Boston. But it wasn't just about collecting for Isabella, she was a visionary. Her idea was to create a museum that wasn't just a place to house art, it was a sanctuary, a space where visitors could feel the intimacy of her collection. The museum she founded in 1903 was unlike any other. Designed to resemble a Venetian palace, it was an architectural marvel that combined a sense of grandeur with a personal touch. The galleries were carefully arranged around an interior courtyard, with an emphasis on light, space, and atmosphere. The result was something akin to stepping into another world, a world that seemed to hold on to every single moment of beauty it could find. Gardner's passion for art wasn't limited to just acquiring pieces. She was deeply involved in every aspect of the museum's creation. She oversaw the layout of the galleries, the arrangement of the artworks, and even the smallest details, such as the way light filtered through the windows at different times of day. This commitment to detail and aesthetics gave the museum an unparalleled sense of coherence. It was as if the building itself became a living, breathing work of art, a representation of Isabella's vision. But Isabella Stewart Gardner wasn't just an art lover, she was a force to be reckoned with. She didn't bow to the expectations of society or the art world. She chose to live on her own terms, often disregarding conventional norms in favor of her personal interests and eccentricities. Her relationships were often unconventional, and she had no qualms about speaking her mind, even when it challenged the status quo. Perhaps that's why her museum feels like such a personal, intimate space, because it was a direct reflection of her in all her quirks and contradictions. As the years passed, the museum grew in both size and reputation. Isabella continued to add to her collection, acquiring masterpieces that would eventually make up the heart of the Gardner Museum. And when she passed away in 1994, she left behind a museum that she had built from the ground up, a legacy that would live on, even if the world would come to know it not only for its art, but for the loss of its most precious pieces. Historians still argue whether Isabella's vision was too personal, too tied to her own tastes, or whether her fiercely independent nature was part of what made the museum so unique. One thing is certain though, her influence is still felt in every corner of the museum, even today. The art, the space, and the spirit of Isabella Stewart Gardner herself live on, even as the mystery of the missing paintings continues to haunt the halls. The Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, now an iconic landmark in Boston, wasn't always the pristine, world-renowned institution it is today. In fact, its roots were humbler, starting as the personal vision of a woman whose love for art transcended the conventional boundaries of what a museum could be. Gardner was adamant about making her museum not just a display case for her treasured pieces, but a place where art could live and breathe in the real world, something that could spark personal connections between visitors and the works on display. The museum itself, designed by architect Willard T. Sears, is an architectural gem that blends a 15th century Venetian-style palace with the modern necessities of a museum. Gardner's meticulous attention to detail is evident in every corner of the space. The building features an open courtyard at its heart, a reflection of Gardner's preference for spaces that felt alive with natural light. The courtyard, with its lush greenery and serene atmosphere, creates an unusual yet beautiful contrast to the often heavy works of art displayed inside. Each gallery was designed to invite visitors to explore, linger, and even engage with the art in a way that felt deeply personal, intimate even. One of the defining characteristics of the Gardner Museum is its peculiar layout. The galleries are not ordered by artist or school of thought, but are instead arranged in a way that reflects Gardner's personal relationship to the pieces. Each work is placed where it feels right, creating an experience that's less like touring a traditional museum and more like stepping into someone's living room, someone who just happens to have the most extraordinary collection of art imaginable. The collection itself, which spans over 2,500 pieces, includes everything from Renaissance paintings and sculptures to European and Asian textiles. The museum holds some of the most prized works of art in the world, including pieces by Rembrandt, Titian, and Vermeer. But it's not just about the big names. There are also lesser-known treasures, pieces that tell stories of cultures from around the globe. Gardner was determined to make her museum not only a haven for Western art, but a celebration of global creativity. However, what truly sets the museum apart is the way it bridges the gap between its history and its contemporary relevance. Even as art movements have shifted and new technologies have changed the way we interact with art, the museum remains a place of timeless charm. Its old-world sensibility blends with modern-day curiosity, drawing people from all over the world who come not just to admire the art, but to experience it. Sadly, this incredible institution would become the stage for one of the most baffling crimes in art history. But before we get to that, it's essential to understand why the loss of these paintings was so devastating. It wasn't just about the art itself, it was about the loss of a carefully curated vision, one that Isabella Stewart Gardner had spent her entire life cultivating. Historians still argue whether the museum's blend of old and new was part of what made it so vulnerable, or whether it was simply a matter of poor luck. Perhaps, if the collection had been housed in a more conventional, high-security museum, it might not have been such an easy target. But with its warm, inviting atmosphere and unassuming security measures, the Gardner Museum was a place where visitors could walk through the doors and feel like they were stepping into the heart of an artist's dream. The pieces that were stolen from the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum were not just valuable in a financial sense. They were priceless works of art, each with its own rich history and significance. When two men disguised as police officers entered the museum on that fateful night, they didn't just take random items off the walls. They took some of the world's most famous and beloved masterpieces, each of which held immense cultural, historical, and artistic value. let's take a closer look at what was lost. Among the most famous pieces stolen was the concert by Johannes Vermeer, a work that had hung in the museum for decades. This painting was particularly significant because it was one of only a few works by Vermeer, a master of Dutch Baroque painting. The concert depicted a serene moment of music making, with three figures, a woman playing the harpsichord, a man with a violin, and another figure listening intently. Its soft color palette and delicate brushwork made it a stunning example of Vermeer's ability to capture fleeting moments in time. Its loss was not only a blow to the Gardner collection, but to the art world as a whole, leaving behind an enormous gap in the study of Dutch art. Alongside the concert was The Storm on the Sea of Galilee, a dramatic seascape by Rembrandt, which depicted a biblical scene of Christ and his disciples caught in a storm. This piece was considered one of Rembrandt's greatest achievements. With its dynamic composition and bold use of light and shadow, it was a prime example of the artist's mastery of the medium. Rembrandt's ability to evoke emotion through his use of light and shadow was unparalleled, and this work was a shining example of his genius. Its absence, along with that of Vermeer's painting, marked a seismic loss in the art world, as these two works were considered the jewels of the museum's collection. Also among the stolen pieces were several works by Degas, including sketches and a bronze sculpture of a ballerina. Degas was famous for his depictions of ballet dancers, and his works at the Gardner Museum provided a glimpse into his exploration of movement, form, and the human body. These pieces, although less well known than the Vermeer or Rembrandt, held immense artistic value, as they represented a crucial part of Degas' legacy and his contributions to Impressionist art. In addition to these major works, the thieves also made off with other paintings by artists such as Manet, Goya, and Flink, as well as some lesser-known pieces. The fact that the thieves didn't simply grab what they could, but carefully selected the most valuable and historically significant works speaks to their preparation and knowledge of what they were after. It was clear that this wasn't an ordinary robbery. It was a heist of the highest order, with pieces chosen not only for their value, but for their importance within the context of art history. Historians still argue whether the theft was a crime of opportunity or a carefully planned operation. Was the thief or thieves familiar with the museum's layout and its prized pieces, or was it simply a matter of luck that they were able to identify and remove these specific works without being caught? Whatever the case, the loss of these paintings is not only felt by the museum, but by the broader art world, as each piece was a part of a larger conversation about artistic expression in history. As the years passed, the stolen artworks became more than just missing objects. They became symbols of the fragility of cultural heritage. The very idea that these irreplaceable works could simply vanish without a trace has haunted the art community. The stolen paintings were no longer just part of a museum's collection. They became part of a larger narrative about the nature of art, value, and ownership in a world that often seems to take such treasures for granted. The night of the heist, March 18, 1990, was just like any other at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, at least on the surface. The museum, with its tranquil courtyards and intimate galleries, had closed its doors for the evening, and the few remaining visitors were making their way out. It was just after 1:00 a.m. when two men, dressed in full police uniform, arrived at the museum's entrance. To the security guards on duty, they appeared to be legitimate officers responding to a disturbance call. The guards, unaware of the danger they were about to face, let the men in without question. The robbers' plan was simple yet audacious. The thieves told the guards they were responding to a call about a disturbance, a ruse that allowed them to enter the museum without raising any alarms. Once inside, they quickly overpowered the guards, handcuffing them and locking them in a small security room. The robbers, now in complete control of the museum, took their time to carry out their heist. What's striking about the way the heist unfolded is the sheer calmness and precision with which it was executed. Unlike most high-profile robberies, which are rushed and chaotic, this one was carried out with eerie composure. The thieves were not hasty. They took care in selecting the pieces they wanted. They knew exactly what they were looking for. After securing the guards, they proceeded to the museum's Dutch room, where Vermeer's The Concert and Rembrandt's The Storm on the Sea of Galilee were displayed. In a calculated move, they removed these masterpieces from their frames, cutting them from their stretchers so that they could be easily rolled up and hidden. At the same time, they made their way through the museum, collecting other works of art, including pieces by Degas, Manet, and Goya. They even took a bronze sculpture of a ballerina by Degas, something that seemed to signal that the thieves had an eye for art, not just cash. It was clear they were not motivated by monetary value alone. They were after objects of significant cultural importance. The heist took over an hour, a remarkably long time for a robbery of this nature, but the thieves remained calm and deliberate throughout the process. There was no sense of urgency, no frantic scrambling. Afterward, they exited the museum as quietly as they had entered, leaving behind a scene that, at first glance, seemed completely untouched by the violent nature of their crime. The guards, still handcuffed and locked in the room, were left unharmed, and the museum's grand architecture remained intact. But within the walls of the Gardner Museum, something irreplaceable was now gone. By the time the police arrived, the thieves had disappeared without a trace. It was as if they had vanished into thin air, leaving the museum with a gaping hole in its collection. The fact that they had been able to pull off the heist without setting off any alarms, or leaving behind much in the way of physical evidence, made the crime even more perplexing. There were no witnesses, no fingerprints, and no clear idea of how the thieves had managed to execute the crime so perfectly. Historians still argue whether the thieves knew the museum's security systems and layout in advance, or if their success was simply the result of careful, deliberate planning. What seems certain is that they had an intimate knowledge of the collection and knew exactly what they wanted. The thieves weren't just robbers, they were art thieves with a purpose. Whether they were professionals or opportunistic criminals, they managed to carry out one of the most audacious heists in history, and their anonymity only deepened the mystery that continues to captivate the world. In the wake of the heist, the question on everyone's mind was simple: who were the thieves? Despite the grandiosity of the crime, the two men who pulled it off remained shrouded in mystery. With no solid leads and only vague descriptions of the robbers, a pair of men dressed as police officers, law enforcement officials were left with little to go on. What followed was a web of theories, suspicions, and wild guesses about the identity of the culprits. One of the earliest and most persistent theories suggested that the men behind the heist were part of an organized criminal group, possibly even the infamous New England Mafia. The region's mobsters had long been known for their involvement in various illicit activities, and it seemed plausible that the robbery could have been a carefully orchestrated job by a criminal syndicate looking to profit from stolen art. The idea that the paintings could be sold on the black market for millions made this theory all the more plausible. After all, art theft was hardly a new crime, and such highly valuable pieces could easily be laundered through shady art dealers or underground auctions. The most prominent suspect linked to this theory was a man named Carmine Romano, a mobster with alleged ties to the New England Mafia. Romano was known for his involvement in a number of criminal activities, and his name kept surfacing in connection with the heist. Some even suggested that the robbery could have been planned as a mob-backed operation, with Romano acting as the mastermind. However, no concrete evidence ever emerged to directly link Romano or any other mobster to the crime, and the theory remained speculative. Historians still argue whether the mafia's involvement was more than just conjecture, or if it was simply the product of the fascination people have with organized crime. Some experts believe that the mob could have played a role in the heist, either by providing assistance or by being involved in the eventual disposal of the stolen artwork. However, there was no hard proof, and as the years went by, the trail grew colder. Another theory that gained traction in the wake of the heist involved the possibility of an inside job. Some believed that one of the museum's employees, or even a guard, could have been involved in the theft. This theory was especially tempting, given how methodical the robbery appeared. The thieves seemed to know exactly what they were after, which suggested they had inside information. The idea that someone on the inside could have provided them with a map of the museum or information about the security system was a logical assumption. However, no employee was ever formally implicated, and it seemed unlikely that anyone with a direct connection to the museum would risk their career for such a dangerous heist. As time passed, the lack of clear evidence led to even more speculative theories. One of the more unusual ideas was that the art had been stolen for some kind of personal or ideological reason. Some suggested that the thieves could have been motivated by a desire to strike a blow against the world of wealth and privilege that the museum represented. Others thought that the paintings might have been stolen by someone who simply wanted to keep them for themselves, perhaps a private collector or someone who considered the works too beautiful to share with the public. Though the theories were numerous, they all shared one thing in common: they were built on very little actual evidence. Over time, as the investigation failed to produce any solid leads, the case became one of the great unsolved mysteries in the world of art. The lack of closure only served to fuel the speculation, and the world continued to be fascinated by the idea of these stolen masterpieces, their whereabouts a secret known only to the thieves, if they were still alive to tell the tale. Historians still argue whether the mystery of the thieves' identities will ever be solved. Some believe that the culprits were simply too clever, too cautious, or too well connected to ever be brought to justice. Others maintain that it is only a matter of time before someone uncovers the truth. After all, art theft, while a thrilling crime, is not a permanent solution. Stolen works inevitably find their way back to the surface, whether through dealers, collectors, or the thieves themselves. But for now, the question remains unanswered. The identities of the thieves, like the paintings themselves, are lost in the shadows of history, their story continuing to intrigue and puzzle those who study the case. The mystery surrounding the heist is as much a part of the legacy of the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum as the stolen artwork itself. With no clear leads and a growing sense of frustration among investigators, the hunt for the stolen artwork ramped up. The museum, which had once been a peaceful sanctuary for art lovers, was now thrust into the spotlight as one of the world's most high-profile art thefts. The Gardner Museum worked tirelessly to reclaim what had been lost, but as the years went by, the chances of recovering the stolen pieces grew slimmer. The investigation that followed was marked by numerous dead ends, missteps, and shifting theories, yet there was always the faint hope that the missing masterpieces might someday be returned. In the immediate aftermath of the heist, Boston police launched an extensive investigation. The FBI, which had been monitoring art thefts worldwide, quickly joined the effort. The authorities examined the security footage, interviewed witnesses, and scoured the area for any clues that might lead to the thieves. But despite their best efforts, the investigation produced very little solid evidence. The thieves had been so careful, so deliberate in their actions, that they had left behind little trace. At first, investigators had hoped that the thieves would try to sell the stolen artwork on the black market. After all, stolen art, especially works as valuable as those taken from the Gardner, was often trafficked through a network of dealers and collectors, many of whom operated in the shadows of the art world. The FBI and other law enforcement agencies reached out to art dealers, auction houses, and even individuals known for dealing in stolen art, but the trail remained cold. It was as if the paintings had simply vanished from existence. Historians still argue whether the theft was the work of professionals who had access to a well-established network of buyers, or if it was a crime of opportunity that spiraled out of control. Some experts believe that the stolen art was quickly hidden away, waiting for the perfect moment to be sold, while others speculate that the paintings were never meant to leave the thieves' possession at all. Perhaps they were stolen for their beauty, to be kept privately by the criminals, hidden away from the world forever. As the years passed, the FBI's investigation grew increasingly complicated. New leads came and went, but nothing substantial emerged. One of the most intriguing theories was that the art might have been hidden in a secret location, tucked away somewhere for safekeeping until the heat from the investigation died down. In 1987, a few years after the heist, investigators thought they might have found a breakthrough when they learned that a known criminal, an art dealer who had connections to the New England Mafia, had been linked to the case. But despite following the lead, no new information was uncovered. Meanwhile, the museum's response to the theft was nothing short of remarkable. Instead of simply succumbing to grief over the loss, the Gardner Museum took a proactive approach. The museum continued to offer a reward for information leading to the recovery of the paintings, which over time grew to a staggering $10 million. They also launched a public awareness campaign to keep the case alive in the public consciousness. They created posters, held press conferences, and even aired television spots, hoping to generate tips or leads that might finally lead to the recovery of the stolen art. At the same time, the museum took steps to preserve the legacy of the stolen works. The empty frames of the concert and the storm on the Sea of Galilee were left hanging in their original spots on the museum walls, creating a haunting visual reminder of what had been lost. These empty frames, as they came to be called, became symbols of the crime in the hope that one day the stolen paintings would return to their rightful place. The museum's efforts to keep the memory of the stolen works alive were commendable, but they also highlighted the deep emotional and cultural loss caused by the theft. The missing art was more than just valuable. It was part of a shared cultural heritage. Each piece stolen had a story, a place in the larger history of art, and the idea that these works could simply vanish forever was a bitter pill to swallow for many art lovers around the world. Historians still argue whether the museum's decision to keep the frames hanging, rather than replacing the artwork with replicas, was the best approach. Some believe that the empty frames served as a constant reminder of the crime, while others feel they only amplified the museum's loss. Regardless, the decision was a poignant reflection of the emotional weight that the theft carried, not just for the museum and its patrons, but for the broader art world, which had lost some of its most significant pieces. As the years turned into decades, the case slowly faded from the headlines. The investigation continued, but the urgency began to wane as new art crimes captured public attention. Yet, the mystery of the Gardner Museum heist lived on, lingering in the minds of those who had followed the case from the beginning. The hope that the stolen works might one day return never fully disappeared, and each passing year brought new theories and whispers about the fate of the paintings. As the years stretched into decades with no progress in the investigation, the case of the stolen paintings from the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum remained one of the most confounding art thefts in history. But in 1994, after years of lackluster results from local authorities, the FBI took over the case, bringing a new level of attention and resources to the search for the stolen masterpieces. With the FBI involved, there was renewed hope that the stolen works might finally be recovered. But even with the resources of one of the most powerful law enforcement agencies in the world, the case seemed as elusive as ever. The FBI's involvement added a layer of intensity to the investigation. The agency conducted in-depth interviews, reviewed evidence, and employed its vast network of resources to track down leads. The FBI's art crime team, established in 1983, had handled numerous high-profile art thefts, but none had quite the level of intrigue or complexity as the Gardner Museum case. They were fully aware of the cultural significance of the stolen works and the enormous value they held, not only in monetary terms but also in their contribution to art history. One of the FBI's first steps was to examine potential connections between the heist and various criminal organizations. The theory that the theft might have been carried out by the New England Mafia was still a prominent part of the investigation. The FBI questioned known mobsters, hoping to uncover any link between the criminal underworld and the stolen paintings. But once again, the trail grew cold. There was no concrete evidence linking the Mafia to the crime, and no known mobsters were ever arrested or charged in connection with the heist. The FBI also sought to explore the possibility that the paintings were being hidden by someone with a personal interest in the works, perhaps a private collector or someone with a deep love for art. The idea that the stolen paintings might have been stored away, hidden in a secret vault or private collection, was a persistent theory throughout the investigation. In 1997, investigators believed they might have been closer to a breakthrough when a tip led them to a suspected art dealer who had links to a notorious crime syndicate. However, after several years of investigation, no new evidence came to light, and once again, the FBI was left empty-handed. Historians still argue whether the FBI's focus on organized crime was the right approach or if they had missed more subtle but crucial leads. Some experts believe that the FBI's approach, while thorough, may have overlooked other avenues, such as the possibility that the heist was not the work of a well-organized group, but rather a pair of criminals working alone or with minimal outside help. Others feel that the FBI's involvement only heightened the pressure, making it more difficult for potential informants or other witnesses to come forward with crucial information. Despite the setbacks, the FBI continued to pursue the case with a determination that matched their long-standing reputation for solving complex and high-profile crimes. They issued countless press releases, aired television spots, and even offered a substantial reward for information that would lead to the recovery of the paintings. The museum, too, remained dedicated to finding the lost works. They continued to keep the empty frames on display, a constant reminder to the public that the theft was still unsolved. In the years following the FBI's involvement, the reward for the paintings continued to grow, eventually reaching $10 million, an extraordinary sum that underscored the value not just of the art itself, but of the cultural significance it held for the world. The years rolled by, and the case seemed to slip deeper into obscurity. New art crimes took the spotlight, and other high-profile investigations diverted attention from the Gardner Museum heist. Yet, as time passed, the story of the missing paintings became a part of art lore. People continued to speculate about where the paintings might be. Were they hidden in the vault of a private collector? Had they been destroyed? Or were they still out there, waiting to be discovered, just as elusive as the criminals who had stolen them? The theft from the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum remained a mystery, one that captured the imagination of the public and art enthusiasts alike. Theories about the painting's fate became more fantastical over the years, with whispers of secret auctions, underground art deals, and hidden caches in distant locations. But no matter how much the world speculated, the paintings remained missing, a reminder of the fragility of cultural heritage and the audacity of those who seek to steal it. As time wore on, the case of the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum heist seemed to fade into the background. The museum's efforts to retrieve the stolen paintings continued, but as the years passed, many began to wonder whether the works would ever be returned. The FBI, despite their vast resources and expertise, had found themselves stymied by a lack of solid evidence and leads. Yet, just when it seemed like the case might slip into obscurity, a breakthrough came in 2013. Of sorts, a new lead, more than 2 decades after the theft, gave hope to the millions of people who had been following the case for so long. In 2013, the FBI made a public announcement that it was confident that the paintings were still alive and that they could be recovered. The breakthrough came after a series of investigations and interviews with informants, one of whom claimed to know the whereabouts of the stolen artworks. The FBI received a tip suggesting that the paintings might be in the possession of a criminal organization based in Connecticut. According to the tip, a former criminal involved in the heist had knowledge of the paintings' whereabouts and was ready to provide information in exchange for immunity. The FBI, in collaboration with museum officials, began to investigate the lead. However, the tip was far from conclusive. The informant's story remained shaky, with many questions left unanswered. There were still no physical leads, and the whereabouts of the paintings remained uncertain. The FBI began to tread carefully, wary of false information or a potential dead end. They questioned whether the paintings had ever actually been in the possession of the criminal group in question, or whether the informant was simply looking for a way out of legal trouble. Despite the lack of concrete evidence, the announcement sparked a renewed interest in the case. The idea that the paintings might still be in circulation, hidden somewhere out of sight, captured the imagination of the public once again. Speculation about the fate of the art began to swirl once more, with people wondering whether the paintings were still intact or if they had been damaged beyond recognition. Would they be returned to the museum in the near future, or would they remain lost forever? Historians still argue whether this lead represented real progress, or whether it was just another false hope in the long history of the case. Some believe that the tip was simply another in a long line of dead ends, a distraction that would ultimately lead nowhere. Others feel that the renewed investigation could be the key to finally solving the mystery. The ongoing nature of the case, with new developments trickling in every few years, keeps the hope alive that the stolen masterpieces may yet be returned. As the investigation into the 2013 lead unfolded, the museum's approach remained unchanged. The empty frames of the concert and the storm on the Sea of Galilee continued to hang in the galleries, a poignant reminder of the works that had once filled those spaces. The museum never gave up hope, continuously renewing their efforts to locate the missing art. They remained committed to their goal, offering the largest reward in the history of art thefts, an amount that reached up to $10 million for any information leading to the recovery of the paintings. But the years continued to pass, and with them, the reality of the situation began to set in. There was no guarantee that the paintings would ever return. The heist had been carried out with such precision and care that the artworks may have been stored away in a hidden vault, their whereabouts a mystery known only to a select few. The fact that no one had come forward with credible information for so long made it increasingly likely that the paintings had been either destroyed or lost to time. Even so, the search continued, as did the fascination with the case. The missing art from the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum had become more than just a crime. It had become a cultural phenomenon. It was the stuff of legends, a tale of audacity, loss, and the elusive hope that the paintings might one day be found. Historians still argue whether the case will ever be solved, or whether it has become one of those rare, unsolvable mysteries that will forever haunt the art world. Will the paintings ever be returned? Will their location ever be discovered? Only time will tell, but for now, the mystery remains. As the years drifted by, the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum heist became more than just a headline. It became a part of art history itself. The stolen works weren't merely pieces of art. They were symbols of everything that could go wrong when the world of culture and crime collide. The idea that these masterpieces, once admired by thousands, had disappeared without a trace seemed both surreal and unsettling. For the art world, it was a tragedy, not just for the loss of priceless works, but for the way it highlighted how fragile the preservation of culture really is. The stolen paintings were more than just objects. They were cultural markers, pieces of history that tied us to the past. The concert by Vermeer, the storm on the Sea of Galilee by Rembrandt, and the Degas ballet sculpture all represented different facets of human creativity, each capturing a moment in time. the paintings weren't merely valuable because of their price tags. They were valued because of the way they told the stories of their creators, the eras they were born in, and the societies they reflected. Their loss was felt not just by the museum, but by anyone who cared about the preservation of history. What made the heist even more frustrating was the constant possibility that the paintings might still be out there, hidden somewhere, waiting to be discovered. Each time a new theory surfaced or an old lead was revisited, the art world held its breath in anticipation. Could this be the breakthrough they'd all been waiting for? Would the pieces finally be returned to their rightful home? Or would the mystery continue to linger, its unanswered questions leaving an indelible mark on the Gardner Museum's history? Historians still argue whether the theft was a deliberate, targeted operation by professionals or the work of opportunists who saw the chance for a lucrative prize. The idea that the thieves were so calm and measured in their actions suggests a level of sophistication that points to careful planning. Yet, it's also possible that the crime was born from a more spontaneous impulse, a chance taken by two men who saw an opportunity and grabbed it. No one will ever know for sure, and that uncertainty only deepens the intrigue of the case. But beyond the theories and speculations, there's something more that lingers in the minds of those who followed the case. The question of whether the paintings were ever truly lost. Could they be hidden in plain sight, quietly circulating in the art world, kept secret by a private collector or an underground network? Some suggest that the works could have been sold years ago, expertly laundered through legitimate channels, never to surface again. Others hold onto the hope that they were simply stashed away, waiting for the day when the case might be solved and the world would be able to marvel at their beauty once more. The lack of closure has made the heist one of the most captivating mysteries in art history. The paintings' whereabouts remain unknown, but their story is far from over. Each year, the FBI revisits the case, hoping to uncover new leads, to break the silence, to bring the art home. Yet, despite the passage of time and the efforts of law enforcement, the mystery endures, a constant reminder of the complexities surrounding art thefts and the sometimes impossible task of recovering stolen cultural treasures. As the years continue to unfold, the mystery of the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum theft is not just an art crime, but a story about what happens when art, history, and criminality collide. For the museum, the investigation is more than a search for lost treasures. It's a search for the meaning of what was taken, the value of the pieces beyond their market price, and the cultural significance of returning these works to their rightful place in history. The art world will continue to wait, as it has for decades, to see whether these masterpieces will ever be returned. Will the stolen paintings ever make their way back to the Gardner Museum? Or will they remain lost forever, their fate unknown? The answer is uncertain, but the quest to solve this case remains as compelling as ever. While the case of the stolen artworks from the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum remains an unsolved mystery, it's crucial to understand the larger context in which the crime unfolded, the underground world of stolen art and the black market. This shadowy, often invisible realm is a driving force behind many high-profile art thefts, including the Gardner heist. The stolen paintings didn't just disappear into thin air, they were likely part of an elaborate network of illicit transactions that exist beneath the surface of the art world. In this section, we'll delve into how stolen art is handled and the hidden economy that fuels such crimes. Art thefts, especially those involving masterpieces like those stolen from the Gardner Museum, are often tied to the global art market, where valuable works of art are bought and sold through legitimate and illegitimate channels. When a painting is stolen, the ultimate goal for many criminals is to find a way to profit from it. However, because art thefts typically generate intense public interest and are widely reported, stolen artworks are often difficult to sell on the open market. They are a hot commodity, yes, but also a dangerous one. Anyone looking to purchase stolen art must do so in a clandestine manner, far from the prying eyes of law enforcement. The black market for stolen art is a hidden world that thrives on secrecy. Stolen masterpieces are often sold through underground auctions or via private dealers who specialize in illicit art transactions. These dealers may operate on the fringes of the legitimate art world, dealing directly with collectors, art connoisseurs, or criminal organizations looking to launder stolen goods. While there are certainly professional criminals involved, sometimes works of art change hands as part of more mundane transactions, where stolen goods are exchanged for money, drugs, or other illicit materials. What's particularly challenging about recovering stolen art is that these works are often hard to trace once they're off the radar of museums and galleries. Unlike many stolen goods, paintings don't have serial numbers or easily identifiable markings. art, as a commodity, is typically difficult to track once it disappears from public view, especially when it is funneled through layers of anonymous transactions and fake provenance papers designed to obscure its true history. Over time, the trail grows cold, and the artwork becomes just another commodity circulating in a vast, hidden marketplace. This underground world is one reason why art thefts like the Gardner heist remain unresolved for so long. Despite the enormous reward offered by the museum, $10 million at its peak, the stolen pieces are not simply sitting in a warehouse somewhere, waiting to be handed back. They are part of a complicated web of criminal activity that makes recovery difficult, if not impossible. And because art is often viewed by criminals as an asset to be traded rather than a cultural treasure to be appreciated, the true value of a painting like the concert or the storm on the Sea of Galilee isn't in the public's ability to admire it, but in its potential to fuel illicit transactions behind closed doors. In the case of the Gardner Museum, the fact that the paintings were carefully cut from their frames adds another layer of intrigue. This deliberate act suggested that the thieves knew they needed to make the artwork as transportable as possible, which might indicate that they were intending to sell it quickly on the black market. This careful planning also implies a high level of expertise, as most art thieves simply steal and leave, often damaging the works in the process. But the Gardner thieves were methodical, treating the paintings with a respect that speaks to the care they took to avoid drawing attention to their crime. Historians still argue whether the stolen paintings were sold immediately after the heist, or whether they were stashed away, hidden in the hope that their value would increase over time. There are some who believe that the thieves, perhaps with the help of an art dealer or a criminal group, hid the paintings for years before making them available for sale. Others suggest that the art was immediately laundered, sold off in pieces or in private deals. Either way, it is clear that the criminal economy around stolen art is a complex, fluid system that makes the task of recovering such masterpieces exceedingly difficult. As the investigation into the Gardner Museum heist progressed, the FBI and other law enforcement agencies began to zero in on the global networks that facilitate art thefts and sales. These networks often span countries, making the theft of such works an international issue. Recovering stolen art requires cooperation between law enforcement agencies across the world, and even with these resources, the task can still prove difficult. The Gardner case, in particular, highlights the limitations of traditional investigative methods when it comes to tackling the black market for art. Over time, the art market became a key part of the puzzle for investigators. The hope was that the paintings would eventually resurface through some sale or transaction, and when they did, they could be tracked back to the original thieves. Unfortunately, this process has proven frustratingly slow. Many people involved in the art trade are highly secretive, and law enforcement must tread carefully to avoid tipping off those involved in the illicit activities. This secrecy allows stolen artwork to slip through the cracks of law enforcement, remaining hidden, unaccounted for, and ultimately unreachable. As the investigation into the Gardner Museum heist continued, it became evident that recovering the stolen masterpieces would not only require traditional detective work, but also a shift in focus toward the very institution that had been robbed, the museum itself. The Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, in many ways, became a key player in the hunt for the missing paintings. The museum's commitment to keeping the case alive and maintaining the memory of the stolen works created a narrative that extended far beyond the simple loss of art. The museum's response was a crucial element in both the emotional and investigative journey that followed. In the aftermath of the heist, the Gardner Museum chose not to replace the missing artwork with replicas, but instead to leave the empty frames in place. The haunting emptiness of these frames, displayed prominently in the museum's galleries, became a visual symbol of the theft, a stark reminder of what had been lost. The museum's decision to keep the original frames hanging in the galleries was an unusual move, one that set the museum apart from other institutions. Instead of sweeping the crime under the rug, they chose to acknowledge it publicly, keeping the memory of the stolen masterpieces alive in the hearts and minds of visitors. The empty frames became iconic in their own right, with many visitors coming to see not only the museum's renowned collection, but also the absence that defined the story. The silence of the missing paintings in the empty frames spoke volumes, reflecting the cultural and historical significance of the works that had been taken. For the public, the absence of the art became as much a part of the museum's identity as the art itself. It was a constant reminder of how vulnerable even the most secure institutions could be, and it elevated the theft to a symbol of loss, a loss that would only be fully realized when the art was returned. Historians still argue whether this approach, leaving the frames empty, was the best course of action. Some feel that replacing the missing works with replicas would have allowed the museum to move forward and continue presenting a complete collection to the public, but others believe that the decision to leave the empty frames served a greater purpose. It kept the memory of the art alive and constantly reminded both the museum's visitors and the world of the crime. The empty frames then became not just an absence, but a kind of memorial, one that honored the missing works while drawing attention to the ongoing mystery. Beyond the visual impact of the empty frames, the museum also took steps to preserve the legacy of the stolen works in more tangible ways. The museum's continued dedication to the case and its public campaigns to recover the art kept the theft at the forefront of people's minds. In the early years after the heist, the museum placed advertisements in major newspapers, offered large rewards, and worked closely with the FBI to uncover any leads. As time went on, the museum's efforts remained steadfast, even though no concrete progress was made. The museum continued to be a center of public interest and media attention, and its actions set the tone for how art institutions should respond to such losses. The Gardner Museum's ongoing commitment to its lost collection ensured that the theft was never forgotten. It became part of the museum's identity, something that was not simply swept under the rug but continually examined, talked about, and remembered. This dedication to preserving the memory of the stolen art also ensured that the public, including the art community, would never lose sight of the ongoing search. The museum, by refusing to let the missing pieces fade into obscurity, kept the story alive in a way that no investigation could. Over the years, the museum's involvement became more than just about recovering lost art. It became about ensuring that the stolen works remained part of the collective cultural consciousness. The museum's leadership and dedication to the case proved that the loss of these masterpieces was not a simple tragedy to be forgotten, but an event that would continue to shape the museum's history and the history of art thefts for generations to come. Historians still debate whether the museum's emotional investment in keeping the empty frames displayed helped or hindered the recovery efforts. Some believe that the constant public reminder kept the story alive in the media, ensuring that people continued to pay attention to the case. Others think it may have created an overwhelming sense of loss that overshadowed the museum's ability to move on from the crime. However, there is little doubt that the museum's response to the theft set the tone for how cultural institutions should respond to the losses of irreplaceable works. It became a model for transparency, dedication, and perseverance in the face of a seemingly insurmountable challenge. Despite the ongoing efforts by the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum and the FBI, the case of the stolen paintings remained largely unsolved for many years. But in 2013, a new development brought a glimmer of hope to those following the case. The FBI, which had been quietly working behind the scenes, made a public announcement that they had identified new leads in the investigation. They revealed that they were confident that the paintings were still alive and that they could still be recovered. This announcement was based on information they had gathered through new interviews and tips from informants, leading many to believe that the missing artwork might be closer to being found than ever before. The breakthrough came when the FBI received information from an individual who claimed to have knowledge about the location of the stolen paintings. The tipster, whose credibility was initially questioned, stated that the paintings had been moved through a network of criminals based in the United States. According to the tip, the artwork had been hidden away for years, and now, with the informant's cooperation, they could finally be retrieved. This announcement reignited public interest in the case, and for a brief moment, there was optimism that the stolen masterpieces might soon be returned to the Gardner Museum. The FBI's investigation into the tip was thorough and cautious. They began to investigate the lead by interviewing former criminals and those with possible connections to the underground art world. The museum, in turn, remained active in keeping the case alive, continually offering the enormous reward and updating the public on any new developments. However, as with so many previous leads, this tip proved to be another dead end. Despite the FBI's efforts and the cooperation of the informant, no solid evidence emerged that led directly to the painting's location. The tipster's claims were eventually discredited, and once again the case seemed to stall. The stolen paintings, it seemed, had once again vanished into thin air. The FBI continued to work on the case, but there were no further breakthroughs, and the mystery surrounding the stolen artworks deepened. Historians still argue whether the 2013 breakthrough was truly significant, or whether it was just another false hope. Some believe that the informant was genuinely trying to help the FBI recover the artwork, but that the criminals involved in the case were too skilled at hiding their tracks. Others feel that the lead may have been an elaborate hoax designed to divert attention away from the truth. What remains undeniable, however, is the fact that despite all the efforts and resources poured into solving the case, the paintings were still nowhere to be found. In the years following the 2013 development, the public's interest in the Gardner Museum heist remained high. Documentaries, books, and news reports continued to be released, all of them exploring the mystery and theories behind the crime. The heist was not only a story about stolen art, it became a larger cultural phenomenon. The case became a symbol of the challenges faced by law enforcement in the world of art theft, and the inability to recover the missing masterpieces became an iconic reminder of the fragility of cultural heritage. Despite the setbacks, the FBI and the Gardner Museum did not give up. The museum continued to offer the reward for information and maintained a diligent stance on recovering the works. As time passed, new theories emerged about the fate of the paintings. Some believed that the stolen artwork had been sold and now hung in private collections, carefully concealed from the public eye. Others speculated that the paintings had been destroyed, either intentionally or by accident, over the years. Historians still argue whether the paintings were ever really meant to be sold on the black market, or if the thieves took them for reasons beyond financial gain. Could it be that the artwork was taken simply for the thrill of the heist itself? Were the thieves perhaps motivated by personal vendettas, or was there a deeper ideological reason for their actions? The theories remain plentiful, but the fact remains: the missing masterpieces from the Gardner Museum remain as elusive as ever. The case has become part of the fabric of art history, a haunting reminder of how vulnerable even the most secure institutions can be. The museum's empty frames, still on display in the galleries, stand as a testament to the enduring mystery. Every year, the public grows a little more distant from the heist, but the mystery remains unsolved, its allure still as potent as when the paintings were first taken. Will the stolen works ever be recovered? The hope remains, but the odds grow longer with each passing year. The Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum continues its search, as does the FBI, but the answer to the most significant question, where are the paintings, remains a mystery that is likely to endure for years to come. As the years stretch on and the theft of the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum's masterpieces becomes more of a cultural legend than a contemporary event, the mystery surrounding the paintings grows increasingly enigmatic. The case has become a perfect storm of fascination. Art lovers, law enforcement, and amateur sleuths alike remain captivated by the idea that these masterpieces might still be out there, hidden somewhere in the world. The fact that no one has ever been able to definitively say where the paintings are, whether they've been destroyed, sold, or locked away in some obscure vault, keeps the story alive and the public intrigued. Despite this ongoing mystery, something even more intriguing has emerged over the years: the enduring legacy of the theft itself. The Gardner Museum heist is not just a story about lost art, but also about the way we view cultural heritage and the lengths to which society will go to preserve and protect it. The theft raised difficult questions about the value of art, its monetary worth, its place in history, and its role in connecting people to their shared past. While the paintings were invaluable in terms of their artistic significance, their loss transcended the museum walls. It sparked conversations about the vulnerability of cultural treasures in an increasingly interconnected yet chaotic world. In the years following the heist, the stolen pieces came to represent more than just a loss for the museum. They became symbols of the fragility of history. As museums and collectors increasingly worried about the security of their collections, the question arose: how could institutions safeguard their most prized works from theft and destruction? The Gardner Museum, in a sense, became the focal point of this larger conversation. The way it responded to the theft by keeping the empty frames on display, keeping the memory of the stolen works alive, forced the world to confront the idea that even our most cherished pieces of history can slip away in an instant. The museum's decision to leave the frames empty was a poignant reminder of the theft's lasting impact. For the public, the empty frames became more than a symbol of loss. They became a metaphor for something more profound, a reminder of how history, culture, and even identity are sometimes ephemeral, unable to be protected from the forces of time and circumstance. The absence of the art was felt as much as its presence had been, and each visit to the museum became a meditation on loss, preservation, and what it means to preserve the intangible essence of culture. Over time, the museum has continued to try and move forward, even though it can never truly shake the specter of what happened. New exhibitions, new acquisitions, and new generations of visitors have come and gone, but the museum remains defined by the theft. The pursuit of recovering the paintings is still very much part of the museum's identity, and while progress has been slow, it is undeniable that the case has brought the museum a degree of fame and notoriety that few institutions could claim. The mystery of the missing artwork has attracted the attention of the world, drawing attention to the museum itself and what it represents in the broader conversation about cultural preservation. But as much as the museum has become a symbol of resilience, the theft continues to resonate. It has turned the institution into an enduring narrative, one in which art theft intersects with ideas of loss, the value of culture, and the mysterious allure of objects that seem beyond our reach. The unanswered questions surrounding the case give it an almost mythical quality, and in some ways, the art heist is now as much a part of the museum's identity as the paintings themselves. Historians still argue whether the paintings will ever return, or whether the case will continue to be an open wound in the world of art crime. The longer the paintings remain missing, the more profound their absence becomes. The public has come to see them not just as valuable pieces of art, but as icons of an ongoing mystery, objects that hold a key to something elusive, something lost in time. As new generations discover the tale, they too become part of the story. Will the paintings ever be returned? Some hope, still, that the truth will come to light. Others have long resigned themselves to the idea that the stolen masterpieces are lost forever. But even as the mystery lingers, the stolen paintings of the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum continue to captivate, their story forever etched in the annals of art crime and cultural history. As the decades have passed, the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum heist has transcended from an unsolved crime to a legendary cultural enigma. The mystery of the stolen masterpieces, Vermeer's The Concert, Rembrandt's The Storm on the Sea of Galilee, and the other priceless works, remains one of the greatest unresolved art thefts in history. The paintings may be gone, but the story they've left behind is far from over. In fact, the mystery of their disappearance has grown larger than the artworks themselves. Today, the tale of the heist is a subject of both fascination and frustration, and for some, it's become almost a living legend. Despite the absence of any significant breakthroughs, the case has continued to captivate both the art world and the general public. The stolen paintings are more than just missing art. They've become symbols of something much larger, the fragility of cultural preservation, the shadowy underworld of art crime, and the ever-present hope that a crime of such audacity might one day be solved. The longer the art remains missing, the more it takes on an aura of mythical status, as if the paintings themselves are living things, just waiting for the right moment to reappear. In the years since the heist, the FBI and the Gardner Museum have not given up on their search for the missing works. The museum's offer of a $10 million reward still stands, though it's been decades since the crime occurred. The museum has kept the empty frames of the stolen paintings on display, as a continual reminder of what has been lost, and what might still be recovered. The frames have become iconic, more than mere placeholders for what's missing. In their emptiness, they hold a symbolic power that no completed artwork ever could. They are at once an image of profound loss and a testament to the museum's resolve to keep the memory of the stolen art alive. Historians still argue whether the pieces will ever return. Some believe that the passage of time has made recovery impossible. With the art world's black market so vast and secretive, it seems unlikely that anyone involved in the theft would ever come forward, especially after all these years. The criminals, assuming they are still alive, are no doubt careful, perhaps even quietly enjoying the mystery they've created. There are also those who hold out hope that the paintings are simply waiting in a vault somewhere, tucked away by the thieves or by those who might have bought them, their true location hidden for the foreseeable future. One of the key questions that remains unanswered is whether the paintings were ever intended to be sold, or whether they were stolen for a completely different reason. Were the thieves simply after the thrill of the heist, knowing the priceless nature of the works would guarantee them a lasting place in the history of art crime? Or were they part of a larger scheme, perhaps hoping to sell the pieces for millions on the black market, only to find themselves unable to find the right buyers or afraid to sell such high-profile works? The motivations behind the theft remain as unclear as the location of the paintings themselves. As the mystery endures, so does the cultural legacy of the Gardner Museum heist. Over the years, the case has inspired books, documentaries, and countless discussions on podcasts and in lecture halls. The theft remains a significant case study in the world of art crime and museum security. The FBI and law enforcement agencies around the world continue to use the Gardner case as a reference point when developing new techniques for tracking down stolen art. In many ways, the heist has become a benchmark, a reminder of what can happen when the systems meant to protect cultural heritage fail. But for all the intrigue the case generates, the stolen paintings are still very much missing. As the years go by, the likelihood of their return grows smaller, yet the hope remains, both in the hearts of those who still follow the case and in the museum that was forever changed by the theft. Each year, the reward for information leading to the painting's recovery remains the same, a glimmer of hope that someone, somewhere, knows where the masterpieces are hidden. Whether the paintings will ever return to the Gardner Museum or if they will remain a part of the ever-present mystery of art theft is uncertain. What is certain, however, is that the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum and its stolen paintings will continue to captivate the imagination of people all over the world. Whether the art is found or not, the legacy of the heist will remain an essential part of both the museum's history and the broader history of art. The empty frames, forever hanging on the walls of the museum, will stand as a reminder of both the beauty that was lost and the enduring human obsession with finding what was taken. And with that, the mystery remains unsolved, a story that will continue to unfold in the minds of those who wonder, will the paintings ever return? The story of the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum heist and the fate of the stolen paintings is a tale that lingers in the shadows of both art and criminal history. While the search for the missing masterpieces has continued for decades, the likelihood of their return diminishes with each passing year. Yet, there is something compelling about this enduring mystery. Perhaps it's the allure of what's been lost, the irreplaceable works of art that once graced the museum's walls, embodying history, creativity, and human achievement. Or perhaps it's the simple fact that there is still hope, however faint, that the missing pieces might one day reappear. As we close the story, we're left with more questions than answers. Questions about the motivations behind the theft, the fate of the artwork, and the mysterious lives of those who may hold the paintings in their hands. Yet, what remains undiminished is the legacy of the Gardner Museum itself. The paintings, though absent, continue to shape the museum's identity, just as the mystery of their disappearance has shaped the conversation surrounding art theft and cultural preservation. Now, as you settle in and prepare for sleep, let the lingering thoughts of this unsolved mystery fade gently into the background of your mind, like the empty frames that still hang in the quiet halls of the Gardner Museum. The art remains missing, the case unsolved, but perhaps in that quiet space between mystery and resolution, we can find peace in the stories of what has been lost and what might still be found. Good night, and may your dreams be filled with quiet whispers of hidden treasures and untold stories. Boring history to sleep. The cause of Kurt Cobain's death. Was it suicide or was he murdered? Hey guys, welcome back to Boring History to Sleep. Tonight we're diving into the life of one of the most iconic figures in music history. Picture a rainy Seattle evening, the hum of the streets outside, the distant sound of a guitar tuning, and the air thick with anticipation. You can almost feel the grit of the Pacific Northwest clinging to the soul of an entire generation, a generation led by a band named Nirvana, fronted by Kurt Cobain. His voice, a blend of anger and vulnerability, became the soundtrack of the 90s, but his life was full of contradictions. Tonight, we'll talk about his death. The question that continues to ripple through music history. Was it suicide or was it something more sinister? Before you settle in, take a quick second to hit that like button and subscribe, only if you really appreciate the content I share. And hey, post where you're listening from and what time it is. It's always interesting to see how far these late night tales can travel. Alright, time to lower the lights, maybe a fan on for that quiet background hum, and together we'll settle into tonight's adventure. Kurt Cobain, born on February 20th, 1967 in Aberdeen, Washington, didn't come from a family of rock stars. His childhood was, like many, a mix of joy and struggle. Cobain was a sensitive, introspective kid who often felt alienated from those around him. His parents' divorce when he was just 9 years old hit him hard, and it marked the beginning of an emotional journey that would shape his art for years to come. Cobain's early years were filled with the typical ups and downs, but his creative spark was undeniable. Music became his refuge, his outlet, and eventually, his career. From a young age, Cobain immersed himself in music, inspired by the raw energy of bands like the Beatles, Black Sabbath, and the emerging punk scene. But unlike many of his contemporaries, Cobain wasn't interested in becoming the next big pop star. He wasn't chasing fame for fame's sake. Instead, he sought something deeper, an expression of his inner turmoil, a way to channel his frustrations into something tangible. And that's exactly what he did when he formed Nirvana in 1987. Nirvana's breakthrough came in 1991 with the release of their second album, Nevermind. The album, with its anthemic single Smells Like Teen Spirit, was an overnight sensation, sending Cobain and his band to the top of the charts and into the cultural spotlight. Suddenly, this young, unassuming musician from the small town of Aberdeen was at the helm of a cultural revolution, the face of grunge music. Grunge, which had been brewing in Seattle's underground scene for years, now had its figurehead. But as quickly as Nirvana rose to the top, Cobain began to feel the weight of fame. He had become a reluctant icon for an entire generation that was disillusioned by the glossy, commercialized pop culture that had dominated the 80s. Cobain didn't just resent fame, he was actively uncomfortable with it. He once said, "I don't care about being a rock star, I care about music." But as his popularity surged, so did his problems. Cobain's struggles with addiction, depression, and an increasing sense of isolation became more public. His appearance started to change, his health began to deteriorate, and the media scrutiny intensified. The same fans who had once idolized him now began to wonder if Cobain could keep up with the relentless demands of fame. To make matters worse, Cobain's personal life was becoming just as tumultuous. In 1992, Cobain married Courtney Love, the frontwoman of the band Hole. Their relationship, often described as turbulent and volatile, added another layer of stress to Cobain's already fragile state. The media's obsession with their relationship didn't help, and the couple's public battles only fueled the frenzy surrounding them. Cobain's addiction to heroin was well known, and his mental health issues seemed to worsen by the day. He was frequently described as a man at war with himself, torn between the love he had for his music and the pressure of being a global icon. It wasn't just the fame that was suffocating him. It was the constant push-pull of his success and his inability to reconcile it with his desire for privacy and peace. The more he achieved, the more he seemed to retreat. In interviews, Cobain often spoke about his dissatisfaction with the expectations placed upon him. His art was a reflection of his inner chaos, and it resonated with millions, but that same art seemed to be unraveling him from the inside. Historians still argue whether Cobain's fame played a major role in his downward spiral, but one thing is clear: Cobain was a man of contradictions. His success had brought him everything he had ever wanted, yet it was also the very thing that seemed to be killing him. His music was raw, real, and at times painfully vulnerable. Yet beneath it all, Cobain was a man trapped by his own demons, struggling to find a way out. Kurt Cobain's rise to fame was nothing short of meteoric, and it wasn't just the music that caught people's attention, it was the cultural shift he represented. Grunge music, with its unpolished, angst-filled sound, became a voice for a generation that felt disillusioned and disconnected. Cobain wasn't just the frontman of Nirvana, he was the reluctant spokesperson for a movement that turned the polished, excess-driven rock scene of the 1980s on its head. And at the heart of it all was Nevermind, the album that would forever change the landscape of rock music. Released in September 1991, Nevermind was a sonic departure from the mainstream music of the time. It was raw, distorted, and filled with emotion. The iconic opening riff of Smells Like Teen Spirit hit like a thunderclap, grabbing the attention of everyone within earshot. The album quickly became a cultural phenomenon, propelled not just by its music but by the sense of rebellion it captured. Cobain's lyrics were filled with dissatisfaction, confusion, and a deep sense of not fitting in. His words resonated with countless young people who had grown tired of the plasticity of the 80s and the surface-level perfection that music videos and mainstream culture had been selling. But it wasn't just the angst of youth that Nevermind spoke to. It was also the reflection of Cobain's inner turmoil. He didn't write these songs to please anyone or conform to expectations. His lyrics were often cryptic, layered with meaning and open to interpretation. Many fans found solace in the vulnerability of his music. Songs like Come As You Are and Lithium painted pictures of confusion, self-doubt, and a longing for acceptance, all while expressing an underlying anger at the way the world operated. But there was a strange irony to Cobain's newfound fame. As his music made its way to the top of the charts, Cobain found himself increasingly disillusioned by the very thing he had dreamed about: recognition. He had always been outspoken about his discomfort with the expectations placed on him by the media and his fans. He didn't want to be a rock star. He just wanted to make music that felt real. But as Nirvana's popularity grew, the pressures of fame only intensified, and Cobain's frustration with the rock star lifestyle became more apparent. Cobain's feelings about fame and success were complex, and they were deeply tied to his sense of identity. He had never set out to be a household name. He had simply wanted to create something meaningful. Yet now, with the world at his feet, he began to retreat into himself. He didn't want to be seen as a role model. He didn't want to be the voice of a generation. In one infamous interview, Cobain stated, "I don't know if I can deal with this. The way people expect me to be something that I'm not." It was a statement that would echo throughout the rest of his career as he wrestled with the realization that the very thing that had brought him success was also driving him further into isolation. Despite his struggles with fame, Cobain's music continued to resonate. Nirvana's follow-up album, In Utero, released in 1993, was another success, though it was far more abrasive and experimental than its predecessor. The album was a reflection of Cobain's increasing frustration with the industry and his personal battles. Produced by Steve Albini, In Utero had a rawness to it that was even more stripped down than Nevermind. The album's lead single, Heart-Shaped Box, was a haunting, intense song that felt like a window into Cobain's soul. It was the sound of a man in turmoil, and it only added to the aura of mystery and pain that surrounded his public persona. Cobain's mental health had always been fragile, and the stress of his newfound fame, combined with his ongoing struggles with addiction, took a significant toll on his well-being. He had been battling depression for years, and by the early 90s, it had only deepened. His struggles with heroin addiction were well documented, and he was known to have a complicated relationship with the drug. Cobain often spoke of using heroin as a way to numb the pain of his mental health issues, but it only seemed to make matters worse. His addiction spiraled out of control, and he became more and more withdrawn, retreating from his family, friends, and fans. Cobain's downward spiral became even more apparent in the early months of 1994. He began to disappear from public view, canceling concerts and interviews, and becoming more reclusive. His relationship with Courtney Love, though always tumultuous, began to unravel as well. The couple's public battles and Cobain's erratic behavior made headlines, and many began to worry about his health. But despite the outward signs of distress, Cobain refused to fully acknowledge the depth of his problems. He continued to push forward, trying to reconcile the man he had become with the artist he once dreamed of being. As Nirvana's popularity grew, so did the pressure on Cobain. Yet, as much as he resented his fame, it was clear that he could not escape it. In many ways, the very thing he had once desired, the recognition and success, had become a trap that he couldn't break free from. Historians still argue whether Cobain's struggles with fame played a larger role in his mental health decline or whether his issues were more deeply rooted in his past. Regardless, what was clear was that the weight of fame was crushing him from within. In the whirlwind of Cobain's fame and creative success, there was another, darker undercurrent to his life: his battles with addiction. Cobain's struggles with heroin were no secret, and they became intertwined with his personal and professional life. While many rock stars of the era indulged in substance abuse as part of the rock and roll image, Cobain's relationship with heroin seemed far more complicated. It wasn't just about partying or self-destruction. For Cobain, the drug became a way to cope with the intense mental and emotional pain that had plagued him for years. Heroin, as Cobain himself later admitted, was a means of escape. It allowed him to dull the effects of his depression, which had been a constant presence since his teenage years. Yet, as anyone who's ever struggled with addiction knows, the escape it offers is often temporary, and the consequences are long-lasting. Cobain's heroin use escalated during Nirvana's rise to fame. It became his crutch during the overwhelming pressure of public life, but it also exacerbated his mental health issues. The intensity of Cobain's addiction led to several public incidents that raised alarm among friends, bandmates, and family. By the early 1990s, Cobain's behavior had become erratic. He was often reported to be high during interviews or performances, and his appearance became increasingly gaunt and disheveled. His struggles were clear to those closest to him, but Cobain continued to deny the depth of his issues. For him, heroin was both a solution and a problem, a paradox that would come to define his later years. Cobain's heroin addiction, however, wasn't the only thing that caused him turmoil. His mental health had been a topic of concern for much of his life. Depression, which Cobain had been battling since adolescence, seemed to intensify as his fame grew. He often spoke of his feelings of alienation and isolation, despite being at the center of the most popular music scene in the world. Cobain's depression was not just a fleeting sadness. It was a deep, all-encompassing darkness that he struggled to escape. His depression became so overwhelming that, in '94, it seemed to push him to the brink. Cobain had been hospitalized multiple times for overdoses and health issues related to his heroin use. Yet even during these hospital visits, he remained determined to avoid addressing his deeper emotional wounds. His mental health issues, paired with his drug addiction, created a toxic cocktail that made him feel trapped in a never-ending cycle. Cobain wasn't just battling addiction, he was fighting to stay afloat in a life that had become too much for him to handle. In early 1994, Cobain made a final, desperate attempt to get his life back on track. After yet another overdose in Rome in March, he checked himself into a rehabilitation facility. This was seen as a hopeful sign, a glimmer of hope that Cobain was finally ready to confront his issues head-on. But less than a week later, he had checked out of the facility, seemingly without any plan for recovery. His actions sent mixed signals to those around him. Was he truly trying to get better, or was he simply caught in the grips of a mental and emotional storm that he couldn't escape? During this period, Cobain's relationships with those closest to him became strained. His wife, Courtney Love, had always been a controversial figure, but their relationship had become even more turbulent. Love, herself struggling with her own issues, was often caught in the crossfire of Cobain's emotional volatility. Friends and family members had expressed concern about his well-being, but Cobain remained largely closed off. His isolation deepened, and his ability to function in the world outside of his music seemed to deteriorate. Despite all of this, Cobain continued to create. His work in the months leading up to his death was marked by a sense of despair and disillusionment. His lyrics were filled with references to personal pain, alienation, and a search for meaning in a world that seemed overwhelming. Cobain's music, even in its darkest moments, was a reflection of his inner turmoil, a man trying to make sense of a world that didn't seem to care. Historians still argue whether Cobain's personal demons were the root cause of his struggles, or whether the pressures of fame played an even more significant role. What is clear is that Cobain was a deeply conflicted person, a man torn between the desire for peace and the overwhelming chaos of his own mind. His addiction and depression were not mere side effects of fame. They were the culmination of years of emotional pain and a deep sense of not belonging. And in the end, it was this constant internal battle that seemed to push him further into the depths of despair. As we continue this story, it's important to remember that Kurt Cobain's struggles were not just about drugs or fame. They were about the pain of being a human being, caught between personal demons and a world that didn't understand. This is a man whose legacy will forever be tied to his music, but also to the darkness that plagued him until the end. And as we delve deeper into the events leading up to his death, we'll uncover more about the struggle that defined Cobain's life. Kurt Cobain's personal life, particularly his tumultuous marriage to Courtney Love, became a focal point in the years leading up to his death. Their relationship was always fraught with controversy and public scrutiny, fueled by the couple's well-documented battles, both personal and professional. Cobain's marriage to Love in 1992, just a year after Nirvana's explosive success, seemed to create a public spectacle that overshadowed much of his artistic journey. It's easy to see why. The union between the famously unpredictable frontman of Nirvana and the volatile punk rock star of Hole seemed like the perfect recipe for chaos. On the surface, Courtney Love appeared to be everything Cobain wanted. She was talented, unconventional, and had a unique intensity that matched his own. But as with many intense relationships, what began as an attraction to each other's free-spirited natures soon became a volatile mix of personalities, fueled by addiction, public pressure, and mental health struggles. Their marriage was a source of constant drama, played out in tabloids and interviews, and it wasn't long before rumors of infidelity, jealousy, and emotional abuse started to swirl. The most public of their issues stemmed from Cobain's escalating heroin addiction. While Cobain was battling his demons, Love herself was no stranger to substance abuse. The couple's struggles with addiction became intertwined, with both parties unable to break free from the toxic cycle they had created. Friends and family began to express concern about their well-being, but Cobain seemed reluctant to address the problem. It was clear that the relationship between Cobain and Love was deeply codependent, each drawing from the other's dysfunction rather than seeking to heal. Cobain, in interviews, often revealed his discomfort with the media's obsession with his personal life. He frequently mentioned that he didn't want to be known as Courtney Love's husband, or the guy who's married to the loudmouth rock star. But despite his resistance to public labeling, the couple's relationship was difficult to ignore. Love, who had her own complicated career and persona, seemed to amplify Cobain's insecurities. There were even times when Love's erratic behavior in public only seemed to intensify the scrutiny on Cobain, leaving him feeling trapped in a narrative that wasn't of his own making. Cobain's emotional state worsened as the relationship became more fraught. He was increasingly withdrawn and began to express doubts about his role in the world, both as an artist and as a husband. He felt isolated, not only from the public, but also from the people closest to him. Cobain, at his core, was a man who longed for peace and normalcy, but the whirlwind of fame and his relationship with Love seemed to create an endless cycle of emotional chaos. At the same time, Love's behavior became erratic too. She was outspoken, unpredictable, and frequently involved in public spats with both Cobain and others. The couple's strained relationship often made headlines, and their increasing public dysfunction only contributed to Cobain's sense of hopelessness. He would later describe his marriage to Love as a constant emotional battle, one that drained him and made him question his own ability to function as a human being. Many people close to Cobain and Love were concerned that their relationship wasn't just toxic for them, it was also affecting Cobain's ability to create and perform. Despite the chaos, there were moments of tenderness between Cobain and Love. The couple had a daughter, Frances Bean Cobain, in 1992, and Cobain spoke often about his love for her. In interviews, he expressed that becoming a father was one of the most important things in his life, and it was clear that Frances gave him a sense of purpose. However, his sense of responsibility as a father was overshadowed by the overwhelming pressures he faced in every other aspect of his life. Cobain's personal struggles, amplified by his relationship with Love, were a catalyst for his increasing withdrawal from public life. By 1994, Cobain was more isolated than ever. He distanced himself from his bandmates and friends, increasingly retreating into the confines of his own mind. His addiction continued to spiral out of control, and his physical and mental health deteriorated. Cobain's struggles with Love were well documented, but the truth of their impact on his well-being remained hidden from the public for years. What was clear, however, was that the stress of his personal life, combined with his battles with addiction and depression, had pushed Cobain to a breaking point. During this period, Cobain's behavior became increasingly erratic. He made more erratic decisions, canceled shows, and failed to show up for interviews. At the same time, his creativity, though still present, became darker. His lyrics became more introspective and reflective of his personal pain. He continued to write and record, but it was clear that his heart wasn't in it. Cobain was not just a rock star. He was a man in crisis, and his personal life was crumbling under the weight of his fame, addiction, and emotional turmoil. While much of the media focused on his relationship with Courtney Love, it was the larger pressures surrounding Cobain's fame and addiction that were slowly pushing him toward his breaking point. Cobain had always been a complex figure, someone who longed for peace and normalcy, but whose mind and body were constantly under siege. The combination of his struggles with fame, addiction, and his marriage to Love seemed to exacerbate his despair, creating a storm that would eventually lead to his tragic end. As Kurt Cobain's fame continued to soar, so did the cracks in his personal life, most notably in his health and well-being. By 1994, Cobain's physical and mental state had deteriorated to a level that no one could ignore. His addiction to heroin had escalated, and he was increasingly erratic in both his personal and professional life. Despite moments of creativity and love for his daughter, Frances, Cobain seemed trapped in a cycle of self-destruction that he couldn't escape. The internal collapse was evident. Friends, family, and even his bandmates were aware that Cobain was struggling, but they were unsure how to help. His public appearances had become more infrequent, and when he did show up, he seemed frail and disconnected. Cobain's erratic behavior was not only affecting his personal relationships, but also putting a strain on Nirvana's future. In 1993, the band canceled several tour dates, citing Cobain's health issues, which only fueled speculation about his ability to continue performing. The once vibrant, rebellious frontman who had embodied the grunge movement now seemed like a shadow of himself, his every move scrutinized by the public, his every word analyzed for deeper meaning. Cobain's increasing isolation was another sign that he was sinking deeper into despair. As his addiction worsened, Cobain withdrew further from his friends and bandmates. His struggles with depression and addiction were well documented by this point, but those who were closest to him could see that he was starting to lose his grip on reality. Cobain was rarely seen outside his home, and when he did emerge, he seemed tired and broken. It was almost as if he was no longer interested in living up to the expectations that had been thrust upon him. One of the most telling moments in Cobain's downward spiral occurred in March 1994, when he overdosed in a hotel room in Rome. While the official story was that it was an accidental overdose, many who knew Cobain suspected it was an intentional act. The overdose was serious enough to require hospitalization, and Cobain was lucky to survive. But even this brush with death didn't seem to wake him up. His behavior following the overdose was erratic, and he showed little interest in recovery. Instead, he checked out of the hospital early and within days, returned to the US. Cobain's overdose in Rome, coupled with his increasing detachment from his family and band, sent waves of concern through his circle. Yet, despite their worry, Cobain seemed determined to keep moving forward in his own way. His behavior became more unpredictable, and those closest to him, especially his wife Courtney Love, were left feeling helpless. There was an overwhelming sense that Cobain was spiraling out of control, yet he resisted all attempts to help him. As Nirvana's frontman, Cobain was supposed to be at the peak of his career, but instead, he seemed like a man drowning in the very success he had worked so hard to achieve. His music had always been a reflection of his pain, but in 1994 it seemed as though his personal struggles were swallowing him whole. Despite his deep dissatisfaction with fame, Cobain was still a public figure, and he was still expected to fulfill the role that millions of fans had assigned him. Yet, he no longer seemed capable of living up to these expectations. He was no longer the tortured artist using music as his outlet. He was simply a man trying to survive in a world that felt overwhelmingly suffocating. Cobain's physical deterioration was mirrored by his mental collapse. His depression had always been a part of him, but by 1994, it seemed to consume him entirely. In interviews and in his music, Cobain began to express feelings of hopelessness and a sense of futility. His lyrics became more introspective, more darkly reflective of his inner turmoil. In Heart-Shaped Box, for instance, Cobain wrote about the suffocating feelings of love and pain, juxtaposing his affection for his wife with his deep frustration and isolation. It was clear that Cobain was not only struggling with addiction, but was also facing a mental and emotional collapse that was beyond his control. As his health continued to decline, Cobain's relationship with Courtney Love also became more strained. Their public outbursts and chaotic behavior were well documented, and by 1994, it seemed like their marriage was teetering on the edge of destruction. Love, too, was battling her own demons, and the two of them seemed to be caught in a downward spiral of addiction, mental health issues, and public scrutiny. Cobain's emotional instability, coupled with the pressure of fame and his marriage to Love, created a toxic environment that only worsened as time passed. The last few weeks of Cobain's life were marked by an increasing sense of isolation. He had distanced himself from almost everyone, including his bandmates. Nirvana had been on the verge of creating new music, but Cobain seemed increasingly uninterested in the band's future. His health was deteriorating, and it was becoming clear that something had to give. The once promising future that Cobain had seemed to have was now in jeopardy, and it was hard to imagine that he could keep up with the demands of his career or personal life much longer. And yet, even in his darkest moments, Cobain continued to create. His final recordings, though scattered and incomplete, showed that his musical talent was as strong as ever. In many ways, Cobain's music remained his greatest form of expression, even as it became more introspective and despairing. But the longer Cobain struggled with his addiction and depression, the more difficult it became for him to find solace in his art. As he neared his breaking point, Cobain's music remained his last lifeline, a way to communicate the pain he was feeling, even as he sank deeper into a personal abyss. The turning point came on the morning of March 25, 1994, when Kurt Cobain was found unconscious in a hotel room in Rome. He had overdosed on heroin, but whether it was intentional or accidental remained a question. At the time, Cobain was recovering from a previous overdose, but this one was different. The overdose was severe enough to require emergency medical intervention, and Cobain was rushed to the hospital. Courtney Love, who had been traveling with him, was frantic with worry. Cobain was lucky to survive, but the incident served as a wake-up call to those around him. It was becoming increasingly clear that Cobain's addiction was spiraling out of control. After the overdose, Cobain checked out of the hospital earlier than expected. He seemed determined to carry on as if nothing had happened. He returned to the United States, and his behavior began to become even more erratic. The incident in Rome was a major red flag, and Cobain's friends and family were growing more concerned by the day. The music world was beginning to take notice of Cobain's personal issues as well, and the thought that Cobain might be in trouble was not just a concern among his inner circle. Fans began to wonder whether he would be able to continue on with his career, or whether his health would eventually force him to quit. Cobain's behavior became increasingly unpredictable. He canceled a number of Nirvana's shows, and there was talk of him being unreliable or too ill to perform. The band's managers and Cobain's personal friends knew that something wasn't right, but Cobain refused to admit it. His isolation deepened, and he distanced himself even further from those who cared about him. Friends who had once been able to rely on Cobain were left feeling helpless, unsure of how to approach him without pushing him further away. Despite his deepening struggles, Cobain remained determined to perform. His music had always been his passion, but now it seemed to be his only form of communication. Cobain's relationship with his bandmates had become strained due to his inability to commit to the group's future. But when he did perform, it was clear that the magic of Nirvana still existed in him. Cobain's voice remained raw, filled with the same anguish and intensity that had defined Nirvana's early success. But the cracks in his personal life were becoming harder to ignore. His health was deteriorating rapidly, and his physical appearance seemed to confirm that he was losing his battle. In the midst of his personal turmoil, Cobain's relationship with Courtney Love grew even more tumultuous. The couple's issues had long been the subject of public fascination, and their personal struggles were now visible for all to see. Love, who had her own issues with addiction and public controversy, was no longer able to hide the strain of her marriage. Cobain and Love were constantly in the tabloids, their fights, public breakdowns, and emotional instability plastered across the front pages. It was a toxic environment for both of them, and it became increasingly clear that their relationship was not just affecting their personal lives. It was now a major factor in Cobain's declining health. The pressure on Cobain continued to mount. His physical appearance became increasingly gaunt, his eyes hollow from exhaustion. Those who interacted with him could see that he was not just struggling with addiction, he was struggling to hold on to his life. His public appearances were becoming rarer, and when he did appear in public, he was often accompanied by Love, but their body language betrayed the strain that existed between them. Cobain was more withdrawn than ever, unable or unwilling to face the truth of his situation. He seemed resigned to the idea that his fame was suffocating him, and there was no way out. In late March 1994, Cobain disappeared from his Seattle home, leaving his wife and daughter behind. This moment marked a significant turning point, as it became apparent that he was no longer willing to face the world around him. His disappearance would lead to a desperate search by Love and others, but it was clear that Cobain was retreating further into his own despair. By then, his body was frail, his mind clouded, and the weight of his addiction, his relationship issues, and the pressures of fame were too much for him to handle. Cobain's disappearance was initially met with confusion. His wife and friends were unsure of where he had gone or why he had left, but as the days went by and there was still no word from him, the situation became more concerning. Cobain had always been a deeply private person, but this sudden isolation felt different. Those close to him began to fear that something far more serious had happened. Their worst fears would soon be realized. The time between Cobain's disappearance and the discovery of his body would become one of the most agonizing stretches of time in the history of rock music. The world waited, speculating on what had happened to the troubled musician. Was he in hiding? Was he preparing to disappear for good? Or was something far darker at play? Cobain's health had been deteriorating for months, but it wasn't just his addiction or his marriage that were weighing on him. His mental health had been in steady decline for years. His depression, which had been a constant in his life, had reached its breaking point. His inability to cope with the pressures of fame and his fractured relationship with Love made it seem as if he was simply unraveling. And the truth was that, in the weeks before his disappearance, Cobain had become increasingly lost. Despite his desire to escape the pressure, it seemed that no matter how hard he tried, he could not escape the storm of his own mind. April 8, 1994 started as just another day, but it would soon become one of the darkest in rock history. That morning, a tragic discovery was made. Kurt Cobain's body was found at his home in Seattle, not far from the studio where he had spent countless hours recording music. He had been dead for several days by the time his body was discovered, and the scene that greeted authorities was as grim as the situation itself. Cobain had died of a gunshot wound to the head, and the weapon was found nearby. The door was locked from the inside, and there were no signs of a struggle. Cobain was alone. The police immediately declared the death a suicide. The details of the investigation were released in the days that followed, and the conclusion was that Cobain had taken his own life. The media quickly followed suit, reporting the official cause of death. while offering their own theories and speculations. But despite the official ruling, there were still many questions left unanswered. The circumstances surrounding Cobain's death didn't add up to everyone, and many felt that there was something more to the story. What followed was a frenzy of media coverage and public discussion, with theories about Cobain's death springing up almost immediately. Fans, journalists, and even some experts began to question whether Cobain had truly taken his own life or whether he had been murdered. This moment marked the beginning of a long and complicated debate. Was Cobain's death truly a suicide, or had he been the victim of foul play? The immediate reaction from the public was one of shock and disbelief. For many fans, Cobain's death felt like a devastating blow. Cobain had been the voice of their generation, and his music had connected with them in a way that few artists could ever replicate. His struggles had been well known, but to imagine that he had taken his own life was difficult to accept. The grief was palpable, and many fans took to social media, forums, and gatherings to mourn his loss. In the days following Cobain's death, however, something else began to surface. The more people looked at the circumstances surrounding his death, the more inconsistencies they began to find. Cobain's final days were marked by a series of strange behaviors, and many who had known him felt that the version of events being presented didn't line up with the man they knew. Cobain had been severely depressed, yes, but he had also shown signs of wanting to recover. He had checked into a rehab facility shortly before his death, and despite leaving early, his actions suggested that he still cared about getting better. So why, then, would he choose to end it all so abruptly? Theories about a possible murder began to circulate almost immediately. Some speculated that Courtney Love, Cobain's wife, had been involved in his death, citing her behavior after Cobain's disappearance and the public drama that had plagued their marriage. The relationship between Cobain and Love had always been turbulent, and many people found it hard to believe that Cobain would have willingly taken his own life with such a complicated and painful marriage. The idea that Cobain had been murdered became a focal point for conspiracy theorists who believed that there was more to the story than the police had been willing to admit. Cobain's death became a subject of intense public scrutiny. Investigators revisited the scene, re-examining the evidence for any signs of foul play, but they continued to conclude that Cobain had died by suicide. They pointed to the fact that Cobain had left behind a note, which was found next to his body. The note, written in Cobain's handwriting, was a farewell message, though its contents were somewhat cryptic. The police interpreted it as a confirmation of his decision to end his life. However, for many, the idea that the note was not a true suicide letter, but something more ambiguous, raised even more questions. Historians still argue whether Cobain's death was truly the result of personal struggles that he could no longer bear, or whether there were darker forces at play. Some of the more conspiratorial theories suggested that Cobain was murdered because of his status in the music world, pointing to potential financial motives or personal grudges. But despite the many theories that circulated, no substantial evidence ever emerged to support the claim of murder. What remained undeniable, however, was the sheer impact Cobain had on the world. Nirvana's music, especially Nevermind, became the soundtrack to a generation's pain and frustration. Cobain's lyrics, often raw, haunting, and deeply personal, spoke to the feelings of alienation and anger that many young people were experiencing at the time. His death only served to immortalize him further in the annals of rock history. In the aftermath of Cobain's passing, the debate over the true cause of his death continued to intensify. Some fans refused to accept the suicide narrative, while others argued that Cobain's struggles with addiction and mental health had ultimately led him to take his own life. The controversy surrounding Cobain's death would not be resolved easily, and in many ways, it became part of the larger mythos that surrounded his life in music. Though Cobain's death cast a shadow over Nirvana's legacy, it did not erase the lasting influence the band had on the music world. Nirvana had revolutionized rock music, creating a new genre that was raw, honest, and accessible. Cobain's voice had been the conduit through which millions of people expressed their emotions, and his death only deepened the connection that fans had to his music. But the mystery of his passing lingered, and the unanswered questions about whether Cobain's death was truly a suicide would continue to haunt his legacy for years to come. As the news of Kurt Cobain's death spread, the media's portrayal of his passing began to settle into a narrative that was widely accepted. Cobain had taken his own life. However, that narrative was far from universally accepted. In the wake of his death, fans, friends, and even some members of the music community began to question the official account of what had happened. The theories of foul play and conspiracy didn't just linger, They grew louder as more people speculated about the inconsistencies in the evidence surrounding Cobain's death. One of the most striking pieces of evidence that fueled the conspiracy theories was the note that Cobain left behind. The note was found next to his body, and the message it contained was interpreted by some as a suicide note, but there were others who saw it differently. The note itself was cryptic, and many felt that Cobain's words didn't ring true for someone who had made the decision to end their life. Cobain had always been open about his depression and struggles with addiction, but the tone of the note struck some people as inconsistent with the image of someone who was ready to end it all. The content of the note seemed to paint a picture of a man who was not only struggling with his personal demons, but also with the pressure of fame. He spoke of not being able to deal with the expectations placed on him by others, and the note seemed to indicate that Cobain was frustrated with the very role he had been thrust into as the reluctant leader of a generation. But for many, the question remained, was this really the farewell message of someone who had decided to take their own life? Or was it something else entirely? In the years following Cobain's death, more and more people came forward with their own theories about what had happened. Some of these theories pointed to Courtney Love as being directly involved in Cobain's death. Their relationship, which had been troubled for years, became the focal point of many conspiracy theories. Some people pointed to Love's behavior in the aftermath of Cobain's death as suspicious, claiming that she seemed overly composed, too quick to speak publicly, and even somewhat indifferent. Others suggested that Love, herself struggling with addiction and emotional instability, might have been involved in a darker scheme to end Cobain's life. There were also people who believed that Cobain's death was not a suicide at all, but a murder orchestrated by someone with a vested interest in silencing the musician. Some argued that Cobain had become a burden to the music industry due to his increasingly erratic behavior and his inability to cope with the pressures of fame. His unwillingness to conform to the expectations of the industry had made him an unreliable figure in the eyes of some, and there were those who believed that the decision to end his life was made for him. The theories suggested that Cobain had been murdered in an attempt to preserve the financial interests tied to his music, a disturbing thought that only added to the air of mystery surrounding his death. Despite the proliferation of these theories, there was no conclusive evidence to support any of the murder claims. The police had investigated the scene thoroughly, and the official conclusion remained that Cobain had died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. For all the questions and doubts, the investigation did not yield any new revelations to challenge the conclusion that Cobain had taken his own life. But the fact that the conspiracy theories persisted and continue to this day suggests that many people were not ready to accept the idea that a man who had been such an icon of rebellion could be so vulnerable, so consumed by his own struggles, that he would choose to end it all. Historians still argue over the validity of these theories. Some believe that Cobain's death is a tragic reflection of the pressures of fame and the mental health challenges that many musicians face, while others remain convinced that there is more to the story. The debate surrounding his death has only deepened in the years since, with some fans still hoping for a clearer explanation of what truly happened. Cobain's legacy as a musician and a cultural icon remains strong, but the mystery surrounding his death continues to cast a long shadow over his life and work. Beyond the conspiracy theories, however, what remains clear is the profound impact that Cobain had on the music world and on popular culture as a whole. Nirvana's music was a mirror of the angst, disillusionment, and frustration that many young people were feeling in the early 1990s. Cobain's lyrics, often filled with self-doubt, alienation, and vulnerability, spoke to an entire generation of listeners who had grown tired of the polished, commercialized pop culture that had dominated the 1980s. In many ways, Cobain became the voice of the disillusioned youth, and his music provided a raw and unfiltered expression of their struggles. Despite the tragic nature of his death, Kurt Cobain's influence remains undeniable. His music continues to inspire and resonate with new generations of fans, and his legacy as one of the most important figures in rock music endures. Cobain's ability to blend raw emotion with innovative musical experimentation made him one of the most influential artists of the 1990s, and his influence can still be felt in the music of today. His untimely death, while heartbreaking, has only added to the mystique that surrounds his life and career, cementing his status as a cultural icon whose impact will never fade. Cobain's life was a tragic reminder of the dangers of fame, addiction, and mental illness. His story is one of brilliance, struggle, and ultimately, loss. And though the circumstances of his death remain clouded in uncertainty, what remains clear is the lasting effect his music has had on the world. Cobain may have left us far too soon, but his voice, his music, and his influence will continue to echo through the halls of rock history for years to come. As the years passed following Kurt Cobain's death, the debate over his cause of death continued to simmer in the public consciousness. While the official ruling remained that Cobain had died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound, many fans and critics still questioned the narrative. Cobain's death had been a turning point in rock history, and in some ways his tragic end immortalized him in a way that few musicians ever experience. Nirvana's music continued to be celebrated, and Cobain's image as the tortured artist became cemented in the annals of music lore. Yet, the mystery surrounding his death refused to dissipate, creating a sense of unresolved tension that clung to his legacy. The lingering questions about Cobain's death were fueled not only by the inconsistencies in the evidence, but also by the broader cultural climate of the time. The early 1990s were marked by a rise in interest in conspiracy theories and distrust in official narratives, which created fertile ground for the speculation that surrounded Cobain's passing. In the years following his death, a number of documentaries, books, and articles were released, each offering a different perspective on the events of April 1994. Some of these works presented evidence that challenged the official suicide ruling, while others reinforced it. The more people looked at the available information, the more complicated the case seemed to become. One of the most influential figures in the posthumous debate about Cobain's death was private investigator Tom Grant. Grant had been hired by Courtney Love in the days after Cobain's disappearance to locate him, and he quickly became a vocal proponent of the theory that Cobain had been murdered rather than having taken his own life. Grant's investigations and his vocal criticism of the official suicide ruling brought a renewed sense of attention to the case. His claims were fueled by perceived inconsistencies in the police report, such as the apparent lack of fingerprints on the shotgun and the question of why Cobain's suicide note seemed to be written in two different handwriting styles. For Grant and others who supported the murder theory, these inconsistencies were signs that the case had been mishandled, and they argued that the truth about Cobain's death had been obscured. However, despite these claims, no concrete evidence ever emerged to support the idea that Cobain had been murdered. The police had thoroughly investigated the scene, and the autopsy report concluded that the cause of death was a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Cobain's fingerprints were found on the shotgun, and the evidence suggested that there was no sign of forced entry into his home. Still, the doubts remained, fueled by the ongoing publicity and the continued questioning of the official story. For some, Cobain's death remained a puzzle that had not yet been solved, and the speculation surrounding it only deepened with time. Beyond the investigation itself, Cobain's death also prompted a broader cultural conversation about the pressures of fame, mental health, and the dark side of the music industry. Cobain had been a reluctant celebrity, someone who never wanted the fame that came with his success. His struggles with addiction, depression, and the pressures of the public eye were well documented, and many saw his death as the tragic consequence of a system that chewed up and spit out artists like him. Cobain had been a voice for the disaffected youth of the 1990s, and his death seemed to underscore the fragile nature of that voice. For many, Cobain's death was a reminder of the vulnerability of those who became cultural icons without ever asking for it. Cobain's tragic end also highlighted the need for greater awareness of mental health issues, particularly within the music industry. Cobain had long struggled with depression and suicidal thoughts, and many of his lyrics expressed his sense of alienation and hopelessness. His death was a wake-up call for many who had idolized him, and it forced the public to confront the fact that even the most successful and beloved artists could be battling personal demons that were hidden from the world. Cobain's struggles were not just a product of fame. They were part of a larger, more complex issue that affected many people, both within the entertainment industry and beyond. In the years following Cobain's death, mental health advocacy groups began to gain more traction, and the conversation around depression and suicide became more prominent. Cobain's death, while tragic, helped to bring attention to the fact that mental health issues were often ignored or downplayed, particularly in the high-pressure world of rock and roll. His story became a cautionary tale about the dangers of untreated mental illness, and it spurred a movement toward better mental health care for artists and fans alike. Despite the tragic nature of Cobain's death, his legacy as an artist remained powerful. Nirvana's music, particularly Nevermind, continued to resonate with new generations of listeners. Cobain's voice, full of raw emotion and vulnerability, still spoke to those who felt alienated or misunderstood. His music remained a reflection of the pain, confusion, and frustration that so many people felt, and it continued to serve as a soundtrack for those struggling with their own inner turmoil. Cobain's death had not extinguished his influence. If anything, it had only solidified his place in music history. Cobain's death also left a lasting impact on the grunge movement, which had emerged as a cultural force in the early 1990s. The movement was defined by its rejection of mainstream values and its embrace of authenticity and raw expression. Cobain, with his unpolished sound and emotionally charged lyrics, had been the figurehead of this movement, and his death marked the end of an era for grunge music. Though bands like Pearl Jam and Soundgarden continued to thrive in the wake of Cobain's death, the loss of Nirvana was felt deeply within the grunge community. Cobain had been the heart of it all, and without him, the movement seemed to lose its most significant voice. Despite all the speculation and theories about the cause of his death, Kurt Cobain's influence on the music world was undeniable. His music continues to inspire and shape the sound of modern rock, and his legacy lives on through the artists who followed in his footsteps. The mystery surrounding his death may never be fully resolved, but it has only added to the legend of a man whose life and music will never be forgotten. As Kurt Cobain's legacy continued to grow in the years following his death, it became clear that his influence transcended both the genre of grunge and the music scene of the 90s. Cobain, despite his personal demons and tragic end, had shaped the trajectory of rock music in a way that few artists could ever hope to achieve. His unique voice, both literally and figuratively, captured the essence of a generation's frustrations and disillusionments. He had become an icon, not just for the music he created, but for the way he had embodied the raw vulnerability of being a young person in a complicated, often harsh world. Even in the face of mounting conspiracy theories and unanswered questions about his death, Cobain's artistic impact remained undeniable. His songs, often filled with despair and existential questions, had struck a chord with millions. The intensity of Nirvana's music, the blend of angst and beauty, was something that resonated not only with those who had grown up during his time, but also with younger listeners discovering the band's catalog years after Cobain's death. Smells Like Teen Spirit remained the anthem of a generation, a song whose explosive power and defiant attitude had transcended time. But it wasn't just that single, it was the depth of Nirvana's work, including the tracks on In Utero, that showed the complexity of Cobain as a musician. Cobain's ability to convey deep emotional struggles, whether through his tortured lyrics or his raspy, vulnerable voice, was unmatched. His rawness became his signature, and it spoke to listeners in a way that few other artists could. While the 90s saw many bands experimenting with new sounds and expressions, Cobain had created something deeply personal and yet universal. His music became a way for people to express their anger, sadness, and confusion. In a world that often pushed for perfection, Cobain's music felt real, imperfect, chaotic, and emotionally charged. This authenticity made him a beacon for a generation that rejected the gloss and excess of the 80s. But the more the years went on, the more it became apparent that Cobain's death had only deepened the connection his fans had to his music. His tragic end, whether it was a suicide or something else, only added to the mystique surrounding him. For some, Cobain's death seemed to confirm the themes of his music: the hopelessness, the lack of control, the sense of being overwhelmed by forces beyond one's control. In this way, Cobain's life and death had become a symbol, not just of the perils of fame, addiction, and mental illness, but also of the darker side of artistic creation itself. For Cobain, it was clear that the price of his art was steep. His ability to express the deepest parts of the human experience had come at the cost of his mental and emotional well-being. Cobain's death also led to an increased awareness of the mental health struggles faced by many musicians and public figures. His story became a cautionary tale, a reminder that behind the public personas of rock stars, there was often a person grappling with feelings of isolation, alienation, and pain. Cobain's music had always been raw and unflinching, and in many ways, it was a direct reflection of the mental health battles he fought every day. As awareness of mental health issues grew, Cobain's legacy also served as a rallying cry for better support and care for artists dealing with similar struggles. The theory of a conspiracy surrounding Cobain's death continued to be discussed, particularly by those who felt that the official suicide ruling didn't make sense. The ongoing mystery added layers to his already complex legacy. Despite the theories, the truth remained elusive, and Cobain's death continued to be a subject of public fascination. While many questioned the official narrative, Others continued to hold the belief that Cobain's struggles with addiction and depression had ultimately led him to take his own life. The debate, fueled by a combination of disbelief, grief, and speculation, would continue for decades to come. But for all the theories and unanswered questions, one fact remained. Cobain was no longer with us, and his absence left an irreplaceable void in both music and culture. In the years that followed, Cobain's family, including his daughter Frances Bean Cobain, kept his memory alive. Frances, who was just a toddler when her father passed away, has spoken publicly about the complicated relationship she had with her father's legacy. She was too young to fully understand the magnitude of her father's impact on the world, but as she grew older, she began to recognize the weight of his influence. Frances Bean Cobain, in her own right, became a creative force, working as an artist and model. Despite the challenges of growing up in the shadow of such a large cultural icon, she worked to preserve her father's memory while forging her own path. The Cobain legacy, now in its second generation, remained a powerful force, reminding the world of the indelible mark Kurt had made on music. Despite his early death, Cobain's impact on the culture of the 1990s and the decades that followed cannot be overstated. His music was raw and filled with honesty, and it struck a chord with millions of listeners who saw in his songs a reflection of their own frustrations and disillusionment. Cobain was never interested in fame for fame's sake. He simply wanted to make music that felt true to him. And in the end, it was this authenticity that made him one of the most enduring figures in rock history. While the conspiracy theories and speculation surrounding his death will likely never be fully resolved, Kurt Cobain's legacy as an artist remains untarnished. His music continues to resonate with fans new and old, and his role in shaping the sound of the 90s and beyond is secure. Cobain's life may have ended tragically, but his impact on music, culture, and the hearts of millions of fans will endure for generations to come. Kurt Cobain's death, regardless of the unanswered questions, marked a pivotal moment not just in music, but in the cultural fabric of the 1990s and beyond. The grief that followed his passing was immense, but what followed was just as important: the immense outpouring of love and respect for his work, his voice, and his legacy. In the wake of tragedy, something remarkable happened. Cobain's music transcended its own time. It continued to resonate year after year as a constant reminder of the power of honest, unfiltered art. His death served not only as a loss, but as a reaffirmation of the very things that made his music so impactful. What people gravitated towards wasn't just the anger, angst, or the rawness of his music, but the vulnerability he embodied. Kurt Cobain became the reluctant hero for those who didn't fit the societal mold, the ones who felt lost or misunderstood. His voice spoke for the outcasts, the misfits, the troubled souls of an entire generation. But Cobain's influence didn't stop with the 90s. It reached across the years, impacting music, culture, and the very way we think about fame, mental health, and art. After his death, Nirvana's albums, particularly Nevermind and In Utero, continued to be rediscovered by new generations of listeners. Young people, long after the grunge movement had faded, found solace in Cobain's lyrics, which remained poignant no matter the decade. His music was timeless. Songs like Come As You Are, All Apologies, and Heart-Shaped Box seemed to encapsulate the human experience in ways that felt universal. Cobain had a way of capturing raw emotion, making it feel like his pain could be your pain, his joy your joy, and his frustrations your own. In the years that followed, the world of music moved forward, but Cobain's influence remained. Bands and musicians from a wide range of genres, rock, alternative, indie, and even pop, would cite him as a major inspiration. The authenticity Cobain championed became a hallmark of much of the music that followed, pushing artists to embrace their flaws and imperfections. Grunge, though now viewed as a product of its time, had given rise to a new wave of music that valued emotional truth over technical perfection. Cobain had ignited this movement, and even in his absence, it burned brightly. The impact of his death on mental health awareness was also profound. For many, Cobain's struggles mirrored their own. In a culture that often stigmatized mental health, Cobain became an unwitting symbol for those who struggled in silence. His depression and battles with addiction were well known, but what often gets overlooked in discussions about Cobain's mental health is that his struggles reflected a larger conversation that society wasn't yet having about depression, addiction, and the need for better mental health care. Cobain's death, while tragic, helped open the door for a broader discussion about the importance of mental health in the music industry and beyond. In the aftermath of Cobain's death, his family, particularly his daughter Frances Bean Cobain, would come to carry his legacy forward. Frances, who was only a toddler at the time of her father's death, grew up under the public's watchful eye. Like her father, she found her own path in art, and she became a part of the ongoing dialogue about Cobain's legacy. Her work as an artist and her efforts to protect her father's name and memory became a reflection of her desire to honor the man who had shaped a generation, but also to ensure that her own identity wasn't solely defined by her father's fame. Even in death, Cobain's life and music sparked debate. Was his death an inevitable consequence of his inner turmoil, or was it the result of something more sinister? For many, the lack of definitive answers left a haunting sense of incompletion. Yet, in some ways, Cobain's unresolved death added to the mystique that surrounded his life and his art. It was as though the story of his life and death remained a riddle, one that fans continued to try to solve in the years following his passing. Yet, despite the lingering uncertainty, the essence of Cobain, the complexity of his emotions, his artistic vision, and his raw vulnerability continued to live on through his music. In recent years, the continuing interest in Cobain's life has led to a re-examination of his work, his life, and his death. Documentaries, books, and even podcasts have kept his story alive, adding layers to the already rich tapestry of Cobain's legacy. The debate about his death, though unresolved, has continued to fuel discussions about celebrity, mental illness, and the cost of fame. Even with the passage of time, Cobain remains an enigmatic figure, his life a testament to both the power and the fragility of the human spirit. Ultimately, Kurt Cobain's legacy is not defined by the circumstances of his death, but by the music he left behind. His work stands as a monument to the raw, unfiltered truths that many were too afraid to speak. He wrote songs that captured the agony of living in a world that often didn't make sense, but in doing so, he created art that made sense to millions of people who needed it. Cobain's voice will forever echo in the hearts of those who found solace in his music, and his death will always remain a piece of rock history that cannot be fully explained, only remembered. Even in the silence that followed his death, Cobain's influence continued to be felt. His image, once the symbol of a generation's disillusionment, now serves as a reminder of the fragility of genius, the complexities of mental health, and the transformative power of art. Through the confusion, the grief, and the unanswered questions, one truth remains: Kurt Cobain's impact on music and culture is eternal. Despite the unanswered questions surrounding Kurt Cobain's death, it became increasingly clear in the years following his passing that his impact on music and culture was far from fading. If anything, his absence seemed to amplify the resonance of his voice. The void left by his untimely departure highlighted just how significant Cobain had been, not only to the genre of grunge, but to the evolution of rock music itself. His music, once considered the soundtrack of a generation, had continued to inspire both fans and artists long after the grunge movement had subsided. What made Cobain so powerful was his refusal to conform to the expectations that came with fame. Unlike many rock stars of his era, who embraced the trappings of celebrity, Cobain rejected the spotlight at every turn. His discomfort with the fame that came with Nirvana's success was well documented, and this tension between his desire to be an artist and his disdain for celebrity became a central theme of his public persona. Cobain wanted to create something authentic, something that captured the feelings of alienation, frustration, and sadness that he often felt. His music wasn't meant to please anyone. It was meant to express his truth, raw and unfiltered. This rawness was a major reason why his music connected so deeply with so many people. Yet, Cobain's struggle with fame wasn't just a personal issue. It also reflected the larger disillusionment of an entire generation. The 1990s marked a time of transition, where the excesses of the 80s were being replaced by a desire for authenticity. Grunge was a rebellion against the artificiality of mainstream culture, and Cobain, as the leader of Nirvana, became the reluctant figurehead of this revolution. But this role, however unwillingly he took it on, was a heavy burden to bear. The very fame that gave him the opportunity to reach millions of people was the same force that pushed him into deep isolation. Cobain often spoke of his frustration with being labeled as the voice of a generation, a title he never asked for, and one that, over time, became increasingly suffocating. In hindsight, Cobain's death served as both a symbol of the dangers of fame and as a tragic end to the grunge movement. Grunge, though a forceful and impactful genre in the early 90s, began to fade into the background as the decade progressed. The rawness and anger of Nirvana's music, which had struck such a chord with young people, slowly gave way to the more polished and commercialized sounds of the late 90s. Nirvana's success had sparked a revolution in music, but it was clear that Cobain's inability to reconcile fame with his own personal struggles would forever alter the course of his legacy. However, Nirvana's music never truly left the cultural zeitgeist. Nevermind, and In Utero continued to be staples of rock music, albums that were consistently revisited by both longtime fans and newcomers alike. Tracks like Smells Like Teen Spirit and Come As You Are remained iconic, and the emotional power of Nirvana's work continued to reverberate through popular culture. Cobain's voice, though gone, continued to inspire new generations of musicians who admired his raw emotional honesty and his disregard for musical conventions. His influence could be heard in everything from alternative rock to indie music, and his artistic integrity remained a guiding light for those who longed to create art that was true to their inner selves. Perhaps one of the most enduring aspects of Cobain's legacy was the way his music and life became a touchstone for discussions about mental health and the pressures of fame. Cobain's struggles with depression, addiction, and the overwhelming nature of being thrust into the limelight became a cautionary tale for both musicians and fans. As awareness of mental health issues grew in the years following his death, many people pointed to Cobain as an example of the profound toll that fame, addiction, and untreated mental illness could take on an individual. His tragic end underscored the importance of taking mental health seriously, particularly in the high-pressure world of celebrity, where individuals often feel isolated or unable to reach out for help. Cobain's death also sparked a wave of renewed interest in the darker side of the rock and roll lifestyle. For many, his passing served as a reminder that even those who seem to have it all, fame, fortune, and talent, can be deeply affected by personal struggles. The media and public discourse around his death helped highlight the need for better mental health support in the entertainment industry and opened the door for more candid conversations about the pressures that artists face. Cobain's death became more than just a tragedy. It became a catalyst for change in how we view fame, success, and mental health in the arts. Despite the controversy surrounding the details of his death, one thing remained clear: Kurt Cobain had changed the course of music history. His raw talent, his unflinching honesty, and his ability to express the pain of an entire generation made him one of the most important figures in rock music. Cobain's songs, filled with frustration, confusion, and yearning, continue to resonate with listeners, offering a sense of catharsis for those who have felt alienated or misunderstood. Through it all, Cobain's legacy remains one of authenticity. He didn't want to be a rock star, he wanted to be a musician, and more than that, he wanted to make music that reflected his truth. His music wasn't polished for commercial success, and it wasn't created to be universally loved. It was crafted from a place of deep emotion and personal pain. This authenticity is what continues to make Kurt Cobain's music timeless. It's what connects his work with fans, new and old, who still find something deeply personal and relatable in the tracks he left behind. In the end, while the mysteries of Kurt Cobain's death may never be fully answered, the power of his music and his impact on both rock music and pop culture is undeniable. His legacy is not defined by the circumstances of his death, but by the music he created, the lives he touched, and the lasting influence he had on music and society. Cobain may be gone, but his voice, his pain, and his art continue to speak to us across time, offering solace, understanding, and a sense of connection to those who have walked in his shoes. The years following Kurt Cobain's death have been marked by a continuous re-examination of his life, music, and lasting impact. Yet, despite the passage of time, his presence in the cultural landscape remains as potent as ever. Cobain's life and death represent the poignant intersection of fame, artistry, and personal turmoil. His music continues to serve as a bridge between the anger and despair of youth and the universal quest for meaning in an often overwhelming world. For those who lived through his era, and for those who have discovered him posthumously, Cobain's work remains a significant chapter in music history. But beyond the music itself, Cobain's death and legacy have sparked an ongoing conversation about the cost of fame and the pressures that celebrities face. His struggle with the expectations of being the reluctant face of a generation and the emotional toll of being thrust into the spotlight at such a young age are still relevant topics. The grunge movement that Cobain helped define was one rooted in rebellion and authenticity, but as it gained mainstream success, it brought with it a sense of cultural exhaustion. Cobain, in many ways, became the embodiment of that exhaustion, where the desire for artistic freedom collided with the overwhelming weight of public scrutiny. Cobain's death marked the end of the grunge era, but its impact stretched far beyond that. In the aftermath of his passing, a shift began in the music world. Though grunge was no longer the dominant force in rock, its influence could be seen in the music that followed, particularly in alternative rock and indie music. Cobain's honesty, rawness, and refusal to conform to traditional norms of beauty or behavior provided a roadmap for artists who followed him. His refusal to cater to the demands of the music industry became an example for future generations of musicians who sought to make art on their own terms. The cultural moment that Cobain helped create also coincided with growing concerns about mental health in the music industry. Cobain's struggles with depression and addiction made his mental health a focal point, drawing attention to the challenges faced by many musicians. His death was a wake-up call, highlighting the need for better support systems for those in the entertainment industry. In the years following his passing, a greater emphasis was placed on the mental health of musicians, and the conversation surrounding mental illness grew louder. Cobain's story, for better or worse, opened the door to the recognition that even those with immense success are not immune to personal struggles. While Cobain's death continues to be the subject of much speculation and debate, one undeniable truth stands out. His music and the way he lived his life made an indelible mark on the world. Cobain's contribution to rock music and culture was immeasurable, but so too was the lesson his life offered about the perils of fame. In some ways, Cobain had become the ultimate cautionary tale, someone who had everything and yet was unable to handle the pressure that came with it. His struggles illuminated the fact that success and fame don't always bring happiness, and sometimes they can be the very things that drive a person to their breaking point. Cobain's tragic end forced the public to grapple with the complexities of fame and artistry in a way that few other celebrity deaths have. It became apparent that Cobain's death was not just a loss to the world of music, it was a loss to the millions who had found comfort and expression in his art. His music had been a voice for those who felt alienated or misunderstood, and his death, in many ways, was the ultimate expression of that alienation. Yet, as time went on, Cobain's legacy continued to grow. His music remained a vital part of the cultural conversation, providing solace, catharsis, and meaning to those who turned to it. The debate surrounding Cobain's death, whether it was suicide or something else, will likely never be fully settled. Yet, it is this ambiguity, this mystery, that has only added to his allure as a figure in music history. Cobain's life and death remain intertwined with the culture he helped create. His voice, filled with pain and emotion, continues to resonate because it speaks to something fundamental about the human experience, the tension between wanting to be heard and the unbearable weight of being seen. In many ways, Cobain's life has become more myth than reality. He is no longer just a person. He is a symbol of the fragile nature of genius, the complexities of fame, and the human desire for authenticity in a world that often seems to demand conformity. His music and the mystery surrounding his death continue to shape the way we think about art, fame, and mental health. Cobain remains one of the most influential and enigmatic figures in rock music, and his legacy will continue to influence not only musicians, but also the broader cultural conversation about the toll that fame and success can take on an individual. As time moves on, it is clear that Cobain's music will never fade into obscurity. Never mind. In utero, in the catalog of Nirvana's music will continue to be passed down from generation to generation. Cobain's voice, raw and vulnerable, continues to speak to those who have felt disillusioned or lost, and his songs offer a sense of connection that few other artists have been able to achieve. His music was never about perfection, it was about truth, and that is why it has endured. Cobain's death may have been tragic, but his art remains timeless. As Kurt Cobain's music continues to echo through the decades, his influence on both rock music and wider cultural movements remains profound. The years after his death only served to deepen his mystique. Nirvana's music and Cobain's voice became even more sacred, a symbol of authenticity in a world that often favored the polished and the performative. Though his career was tragically short, the lasting legacy of his work can be felt in a variety of ways, from the music that followed in his wake to the ongoing conversations about fame, mental health, and artistic expression. Cobain's unwillingness to conform, even in death, solidified his place as one of rock's most iconic figures. His disillusionment with fame, his raw vulnerability, and his unapologetic approach to his artistry spoke to an entire generation and continue to resonate with listeners today. The irony of his fame was that Cobain never wanted it. He was the quintessential example of the artist who created something deeply personal and connected with the world on his own terms, only to have that very world demand more of him than he could give. Over the years, Cobain's role as a reluctant icon has continued to shape the way new generations of musicians and artists approach fame and success. Cobain remains an example of what happens when raw, emotional art clashes with the relentless machinery of the music industry. His story is not just one of success and tragedy, but also a commentary on the dangers of losing oneself to the public's demands. Artists who have followed Cobain, even those from different genres, often cite him as an inspiration for their ability to create honest, raw music without succumbing to the pressure to conform to commercial standards. The emotional authenticity that he brought to his music is a defining characteristic of much of the music that continues to thrive today, from indie rock to alternative and even pop. Cobain's death, in some ways, has made his work even more powerful. The sense of finality surrounding his life and career imbues his songs with a sense of poignancy that continues to make them relatable. Songs like All Apologies, Something in the Way, and Heart-Shaped Box became reflections of Cobain's internal battles and frustrations, his struggle to reconcile his public persona with his private torment. These songs were born out of pain and personal demons, but they resonated with an audience that was experiencing similar emotions of alienation and confusion. One of the most significant aspects of Cobain's legacy is how his death brought mental health issues into the public eye, particularly within the music industry. Cobain's well-known struggles with depression and addiction sparked conversations about the challenges faced by musicians who often live in the public eye. His music often explored themes of despair and alienation, and his life became emblematic of the struggles many artists face behind closed doors. The stigma surrounding mental health, particularly in the entertainment industry, had long kept these issues in the shadows, but Cobain's death forced the public to reckon with the emotional toll that fame and personal turmoil can take on an individual. In the years following his death, awareness surrounding mental health increased, and many artists and musicians began to speak more openly about their own struggles with depression, addiction, and anxiety. Cobain's life and his tragic death served as a catalyst for that shift. Artists who had been silent about their emotional struggles began to speak out, and the music industry, slowly but surely, began to address the mental health needs of its artists. Cobain's legacy, in that sense, has become intertwined with this growing movement toward better mental health care for musicians, and his story continues to inspire conversations about the need for emotional support in the face of fame. While Cobain's death will always remain a part of his story, it is important to recognize that his life and music go far beyond the mystery surrounding his passing. His creative genius, the way he was able to capture complex emotions with such simplicity, is what makes his music timeless. Cobain's ability to make his personal pain universal has left an indelible mark on rock music. His songs continue to speak to people who find solace in the rawness of his lyrics and the honesty of his delivery. Cobain's voice continues to transcend generations, offering something deeply personal and relatable to each new wave of listeners. Despite the theories that continue to swirl around the details of his death, Cobain's influence is clear. He remains one of the most important and influential figures in the history of rock music. His place in musical history is secure, and his work continues to be cherished by millions of fans who have never stopped listening to his music since his untimely death. Nirvana's impact is undeniable, and the fact that Cobain's music continues to find new audiences, decades after its release, speaks to the timeless nature of his art. Through it all, Cobain's authenticity remains at the heart of his legacy. His refusal to compromise, his commitment to honesty, and his willingness to express his innermost struggles made him a figure of immense cultural significance. He was not just a rock star, he was a poet, a philosopher, and a symbol of the pain and beauty of being human. In his short life and career, Cobain created something that transcended music. It became a cultural movement, one that resonated with millions of people who saw in his art a reflection of their own experiences. In the years since his death, Kurt Cobain has become more than just a rock star. He has become an icon, a symbol of authenticity in a world that often prioritizes surface-level perfection over emotional depth. His music continues to be a refuge for those who feel misunderstood, for those who have struggled with their own mental health, and for those who find solace in the music that tells the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Kurt Cobain's legacy will continue to endure as long as his music is played, and as long as the world remembers the man who was both the voice and the face of a generation. Kurt Cobain's legacy, shaped by both the brilliance of his music and the tragic end of his life, continues to be a subject of fascination, admiration, and reflection. His death, though shrouded in mystery, has not dimmed the cultural impact he left behind. Instead, it has added an enigmatic layer to his story, fueling ongoing discussions about mental health, fame, addiction, and artistic integrity. It's as if Cobain's passing only intensified the bond between his music and the people who connect with it. Despite the theories, the unanswered questions, and the pain surrounding his loss, Cobain's life and music are remembered for what they truly were: a powerful, raw, and often painful expression of the human experience. For those who lived through the 90s, Cobain's music was an anthem of rebellion, of raw emotion, and of a generation that rejected the glossy superficiality of the previous decade. Nirvana's rise to fame was as sudden as it was world-changing, and Cobain, through his discomfort with the fame that followed, became an anti-icon, a figure whose very vulnerability, sadness, and refusal to be anything other than himself made him even more beloved. He was an artist who never wanted to be larger than life, yet his pain became a mirror for those who could identify with his struggles. The continued fascination with Cobain in the years since his death is also a reflection of the nature of celebrity itself, how a life lived in the public eye can both elevate an individual and simultaneously eat away at them. Cobain's death has become a focal point in the conversation about the cost of fame and the toll it takes on those who are not prepared for the pressures it entails. His struggles with addiction, depression, and the overwhelming weight of being constantly scrutinized were painfully relatable to many fans who saw in him someone who, despite his success, was fundamentally human. Over time, Cobain's image morphed from that of a troubled rock star to something much larger. He became an enduring symbol of artistic integrity, the tortured genius who created from a place of deep emotional turmoil. His music, with its raw honesty and defiance of convention, continues to influence and inspire countless artists across genres, but more than that, Cobain's life and death have catalyzed conversations that continue today, about mental health in the entertainment industry, about the price of fame, and about the responsibility of artists to themselves and their audiences. Cobain's daughter, Frances Bean Cobain, has worked tirelessly to preserve her father's legacy while also forging her own path. Her relationship with her father's memory is complicated, as it is for anyone who grows up in the shadow of an icon, but she has spoken about the importance of ensuring that his legacy is remembered for more than just the tragic circumstances surrounding his death. Frances has publicly shared her own experiences of navigating her father's fame while carving out her identity. As she has matured, she has come to understand the complexities of growing up with such a massive public figure as a parent. Her efforts to protect and honor Kurt's memory are not just about preserving a public image. They are about ensuring that his influence remains positive, that his music continues to resonate with those who find solace in it. In the years following Cobain's death, documentaries, films, books, and podcasts have continued to examine his life, his music, and the circumstances of his passing. Each retelling has added new layers to the mythos of Kurt Cobain, but the essential truths about him remain unchanged. He was an artist who created from a place of pain, vulnerability, and immense creativity. He was not perfect, but he was authentic, and that authenticity continues to be what connects him to fans across the world. The debate over the true cause of his death may never be fully resolved, and for many, the mystery only adds to the legend of Kurt Cobain. Whether his passing was the result of suicide or something more sinister, the fact remains that Cobain's life and music had a profound impact on the world, one that endures to this day. The theories about his death, whether embraced or dismissed, are only a small part of the broader conversation about the complexities of being an artist in a world that often consumes its creators. What truly matters is not how he died, but how he lived, and the music he left behind. Kurt Cobain's death remains one of the most talked about events in rock history, and it's impossible to separate his tragic end from his legacy as a musician. However, his music transcends the circumstances of his life and death. It remains an open window to the emotions and experiences of a generation, and a testament to the power of art to both heal and destroy. His songs, raw and heartfelt, continue to be an emotional release for many people, still relevant, still raw, still real. As the years go on, Cobain's place in history only grows. His influence continues to shape the way we view rock music, mental health, and fame. What began as the music of an underground movement is now recognized as one of the most important bodies of work in rock history. The power of Nirvana's albums, especially Nevermind and In Utero, endures. Songs like Smells Like Teen Spirit and Come As You Are have become permanent fixtures in the soundtrack of a generation's youth. But the music also transcends the era in which it was created. It continues to speak to young people today, offering a voice for those who feel lost, frustrated, or misunderstood. Kurt Cobain may have left this world too soon, but his music, his spirit, and his influence will live on forever. His voice still echoes through the halls of rock history, and his art will continue to be remembered for what it was, a pure, unvarnished expression of life's most difficult emotions. Kurt Cobain, the reluctant icon, may have struggled with his fame, but his legacy as one of the most important musicians of his generation is undeniable. As long as his music is played, as long as his story is told, his memory will remain.